When I was 15, I was a bit of a daredevil and was full of that dumb teenage bravado. Living in a small town in Iowa, it got really boring sometimes, so all it took was a simple dare from one of my friends to spend the night at the local bowling alley, to have me sneaking up one of the drop ceiling tiles in the men's restroom, waiting until the place emptied out, then drop down to explore the empty building, like some kind of urban explorer. This would have been around 2005. I knew if I went through with it, rumors would begin to circulate around school, and I would be the cool kid for a while. As pathetic as that sounds, that was our version of clout in those days. We picked a Friday night. As I mentioned before, the entry point was the men's restroom. The ceiling tiles above one of the stalls popped loose easily enough. I had scoped it out during open bowling night the week before. I shimmied up with a small flashlight and crawled onto a wooden platform by the AC ducting and waited. The leagues ran late that night, but by 11 p.m., the last stragglers were gone. The lights were dimmed, and the place became as quiet as a tomb. When I didn't hear any more footsteps, music, or people talking, I pried the tile aside and lowered myself down. I came out of the restroom to an empty building. It was dead quiet. My heart was beating out of my chest because I wasn't entirely sure if all the employees had gone home yet, so I cautiously made my way down the lanes. Slowly. After walking down the length of the building and just kind of stood there for about 10 minutes, I figured I was alone. I didn't hear anything. So then I started to get a little cocky and headed toward the back, past the vending machines, through the door marked employees only, which led to the machines behind the lanes. I had always wondered what they looked like. The pin setter room was narrow and hot. I shined my flashlight around and saw a bunch of metal arms and chains. Pretty underwhelming, to be honest. But that's when I saw something. There was a tall shape standing motionless by the emergency exit. At first, I thought it was a mannequin, but then it moved. I didn't expect anyone to be back there, so I had made no effort to conceal myself. The figure stepped into my light. It was a man, wearing a dark jacket, and I saw in his hand he was holding a single bowling pin by the neck, like a club. I froze. My brain screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. When he took another step toward me, I bolted. I ran back through the door, across the open floor. I could hear him behind me, his boots thudding against the ground. "I'll fucking kill you," he shouted. I didn't look back. I just sprinted toward the restrooms. Thankfully, there was also a bar and a dining area near where the restrooms were. From his vantage point, he wouldn't be able to tell which one I had fled to once I rounded the corner. However, I saw a row of wooden stools against the wall. I grabbed one of the stools and hurled it toward him as hard as I could. It caught him in the leg, causing him to fall, and he went down hard. I didn't wait to see if he got back up. I sprinted into the men's room, yanked open the stall door, and hauled myself back into the ceiling, the tile snapping back into place just as I heard the restroom door burst open. I could hear him below me, pacing, muttering. At first, it was just heavy breathing. Then he spoke. "I'm gonna find you. I'll bash your head in." I pressed myself flat, barely breathing. Dust got in my nose and I had to stop myself from sneezing. The next thing the man said was disturbing. "You killed her. I know you killed my daughter. She was right here. And you took her from me." My blood went cold. Daughter? I didn't know what he was talking about. I hadn't killed anyone. He kept going on like that, voice rising and falling, like he was arguing with himself. "You'll pay for it. I'm gonna make you pay." He then banged the pen against the stall doors, one by one. Then, silence. The minutes dragged on. After maybe an hour, there was nothing. I had no idea if he was still down there waiting for me. I had a pretty good spot on the wooden platform, but I couldn't move without making noise. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I fell asleep right there. I woke up to voices coming from below. The employees were coming in for the morning leagues. I waited for another hour, listening until the place was busy, balls rolling, pins crashing, announcements over the speakers, etc. I carefully slid the tile aside again, making sure the coast was clear, before dropping down. I washed my face real quick to hide how wrecked I looked, and slipped out the side exit into the parking lot. No one batted an eye at me. I told my friends the full story, but no one believed me. They just thought I was trying to make my night in the bowling alley sound more exciting than it was. 2 of my friends were with me when I crawled up into the ceiling, and then hung around until closing time. So they believed that I did go through with the dare, but not the part about the maniac with the bowling pin. When I think back to that night, that man's disturbing murmuring still gives me the fucking creeps. You killed her. You killed my daughter. I don't know who he thought I was, but I'm okay with never finding out. I would hate to end this story like a corny urban legend, and I know it's been like 20 years, but a part of me still wonders if that man still visits that place when the lights go out, waiting in the back room with a bowling pin in his hand. I grew up in Antioch, California, and used to play football in high school. I had planned on making a career out of it, until I had a severe knee injury where my bone was forced out of the socket. Even after I rehabilitated, it was never the same, and it effectively ended my football aspirations. That's when I took up competitive bowling and eventually joined a league. We would often meet up at Delta Bowl and play 3 or 4 games. We would usually wrap things up around 10:30. On the night of December 7th, 2024, we had another league night and things went well. We did hear some loud arguing happening from one of the other lanes, but it had nothing to do with us. By 10:30, the place was emptying out fast. I grabbed my bag, zipped up my jacket, and pushed through the glass doors into the parking lot. My car was halfway down the row. As I was walking towards it, I heard voices rising sharp from the far end, near the perimeter fence. I saw someone in a hoodie standing next to a parked SUV. The man was yelling at someone in the car, sounded like he was threatening violence, and it looked like things were about to get ugly. I didn't stop to listen. It's none of my business. Then a loud pop came from that direction. My stomach dropped, along with the rest of me. More shots rang out. My heart was pounding so loud, it drowned everything else out. I stayed flat for another full minute. When all fell silent, I risked standing. My legs felt like jelly. I saw the hooded man from earlier, lying face down with a gun in his hand. The police showed up a short time later. The shooting was a result of an attempted robbery, which soon turned into a full-blown shootout. I'll paste an excerpt from a local news article about the incident. On the night of December 7th, 2024, a fatal gun battle occurred in the parking lot of the Delta Bowl in Antioch, California, resulting in the death of 2 men. Around 10:35 p.m., Antonio Drake, 34, was sitting in the driver's seat of his vehicle, preparing to leave the bowling alley, when DeAndre Reed, 35, approached Drake's vehicle. Investigators later determined Reed was attempting to rob Drake. An exchange of gunfire ensued between the 2 men. Both were fatally wounded in the encounter. There is no prior connection. Surveillance videos and evidence indicate that Drake and Reed did not know each other and had no conflict while inside the bowling alley. The Antioch Police Department classified the incident as an isolated attempted robbery because Drake was firing in response to being robbed. His shooting of DeAndre Reed is considered an act of self-defense, justifiable homicide. End of excerpt. It's interesting to me that several of the articles written about this case make this sound like it was a one-on-one isolated incident. The part about them having no conflict while inside the bowling alley is not true. News reports on television told a different version of events. The confrontation began inside the building, between two groups. Drake was a part of Group A, and Reed was a part of Group B. They were apparently bowling next to each other, when an argument broke out between the two groups. When it was time to leave, Reed then followed Drake to his car and tried to rob him. That's when the gunfire broke out. I was there that night, and I did hear the arguing coming from a few lanes down from us, and I personally saw Reed standing next to the SUV, shouting at who I assumed to be Drake, the driver. This is yet another case of senseless violence that has been escalating around here. The locals used to consider the bowling alley to be a safe haven from the violence that has plagued our streets. Not anymore. This happened back in 2003, when I was 19 and working as a busboy at Unity Lanes in Zephyrhills, Florida. It was one of those old-school bowling alleys, and is one of the only places Zephyrhills has to offer in the way of entertainment, which was the case back then as well. The night league was always packed with regulars. I got decent tips, and free pool games on the slower shifts. Nothing ever felt dangerous there, just families and drunks having fun. Friday nights would get a little crazy, but the worst that would happen is we had to throw out some white teenager dropping F-bombs and using the N-word. It was a Tuesday night. I was working the late shift. I would say this was around 9 p.m. The place was almost empty because it wasn't a league night. There were just a few lanes with customers. I was wiping down tables, stacking up chairs, when the manager told me to take 5. I grabbed my pack of Marlboros and slipped out the back door to the alley behind the building, where the dumpsters sat against a concrete barrier. The back lot was always dark. There was only a dim light over the door. I lit up and leaned against the wall, taking a long drag. I was sort of zoning out when I heard something rustling inside the dumpster. It wasn't the wind. There was something shifting around in there. I froze. I figured it might be a raccoon or a cat, digging for scraps. But I shouted, "Hello?" Nothing. I shrugged it off and took another puff. Then, the lid of the dumpster flew open, and out she came, like a fucking jack-in-the-box. It was what you could loosely call a woman, maybe late 30s, wild hair matted with God knows what, eyes wide, and clothes filthy and torn. She had that emaciated look that crack addicts have, and she was screaming, a high-pitched wail that cut right through me. In her hand, she held a kitchen knife. She charged at me, full sprint, full banshee. The cigarette fell from my mouth. I didn't think, I just reacted, and shoved her hard with both hands, which sent her flying backward, and she fell hard on the asphalt, knife clattered away. I heard her cursing at me as I bolted back inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. "Somebody call the cops, now! Some crazy lady just jumped out of the dumpster with a knife!" Bystanders were looking at me like I was nuts, so I repeated myself. "I'm not joking. Some woman came out of the dumpster with a knife, and she just tried to fucking stab me." Cops arrived maybe 10 minutes later, lights flashing. They searched the back lot, but the dumpster was empty, and the woman was nowhere to be found. Lou, the manager, covered the rest of my shift after I was done giving my statement, and sent me home early. I was pretty shaken up about the whole thing. I found out that a couple of hours after the cops were called, they tracked her down a few blocks away, hiding in an abandoned shed in someone's backyard. She was a local repeat offender, drug addict, and had multiple arrests for animal abuse, starving dogs, and much worse. And get this, she attacked someone else a month earlier, slashed a guy in a gas station parking lot, over him not giving her money. That one got her on probation, but after this, they revoked it and tacked on an assault with a deadly weapon charge. She ended up with a 5-year prison sentence. I never saw her again, and it was this incident that helped me quit smoking for good. Unity Lanes is still there to this day. It's been rebranded and completely remodeled from when I worked there. For the longest time, this was the only hangout spot for high school kids and 20-something-year-old alcoholics who lived in this town. I got really fed up with the environment of that place and quit about a year after the dumpster woman incident. The owners apparently got fed up as well, because they started having a police car parked there on Friday nights, and security started kicking out anyone who wasn't there for bowling. I wish that policy was a thing back when I worked there. Anyway, that part of my life is long behind me, but I still get nervous when I'm around dumpsters.
Hey, thanks for taking the time to read my story. I've been sitting on my experience for some time now, and finally decided to share it. Just don't use my real name, okay? It was my niece's 8th birthday party at a place called Tampa Lanes, back when it was still open. It must have been one of the last big events there before everything shut down for good. We had a lane reserved right in the middle of the building, and I was there helping wrangle my niece and her friends, trying to get on their bowling shoes. That's when I first got this very uncomfortable feeling. There was this guy sitting alone at one of the lane tables besides us, wearing a dark jacket, face half hidden in shadow, just staring at me. I caught his gaze once and looked away fast, thinking maybe he was waiting for someone, but every time I glanced back, he was still fixed on me. No movement, no expression, just watching. I tried shaking it off, focusing on the party, giving high fives and cheering for gutter balls and eventually singing happy birthday, but the staring didn't stop. It got so bad that I switched spots and sat with my back to him, but I could still feel his eyes on me. After a while, I turned back again. His gaze was still locked on me. Then he crossed the line. He was leaning forward, elbows on the table, then he stuck out his tongue. Slow, deliberate, sliding it across his lips. In this gross, sexual way, my stomach lurched. I didn't scream or make a scene, but my hands shook, and I marched straight to the front counter and told the manager, "There's a guy in a hoodie at the tables who has been staring at me nonstop, and he just did something really creepy and inappropriate with his tongue." The manager didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio and called security. A couple minutes later, they walked the guy out of the building. He didn't resist, just shuffled towards the door with his head down, hoodie covering most of his face. The manager apologized, threw in some free tokens for the arcade as a sorry, and said they banned him from coming back. The party wound down around 5 o'clock. I carried the leftover gift bags to my sister's car and then headed over to my car. That's when I saw 2 police cruisers parked right next to my silver Honda. An officer had someone cuffed and bent over one of the cars. When I got closer, I saw that it was the hooded man, the same one who had been thrown out. Another cop walked up after I asked what was going on.
"Ma'am, is this your vehicle?"
I nodded, heart pounding. "Yeah, what happened?" He explained that a family leaving spotted him in the lot with a wire hanger, working it into the driver's side door of my car, trying to pop the lock. They shouted at him, but he ignored them and just kept trying to unlock the car until they rolled up and arrested him a few minutes later. I stared at the fresh scratches around my door handle. The officer asked if I knew him. I said no, but quickly told him about what happened in the bowling alley earlier. They checked his background. He had priors for harassment, loitering, stuff like that. Nothing super violent, but enough to make my legs feel weak. They took my statement, let me go, and I drove home fast. To this day, I still don't know how he knew which car was mine. We pulled in hours earlier and unloaded cake and gifts with the kids and my sister, and nothing stood out to me, but he must have been there, watching from the lot. Maybe he saw me get out of my car when we first showed up and then followed us inside. I never went back to Tampa Lanes, and it wasn't long after that night it closed down for good, and the building has sat empty for years now. I have to drive by that place on my way to and from work, and every time I do, I wonder what could have happened to me if that man had managed to jimmy the lock on my car.
The night of April 13th, 1973, started like every girl's prom night should. At the time, I was 17, a junior in high school, in a small town in Kansas. I had spent that entire afternoon in front of a mirror in my bedroom, getting ready. I was super nervous and excited. I wanted things to go well with my date, David. He showed up right on time, driving his dad's pickup, and politely introduced himself to my parents. He looked sharp in his rented tux. We then drove to the prom after promising my father that I'd be back by 10:30. Our prom was being held in our school's gymnasium. The place was decked out with paper stars hanging from the ceiling, a spinning disco ball, popular during that era, and a live band playing Elton John cover songs. Everyone was there, cheerleaders, football players, and even the misfits who sat in the back of the class. David and I danced to the first few songs, laughing together as he stepped on my toes. But the good times didn't last long. You see, David was normally a good guy when he was sober. But after he came back from hanging out with a couple of his buddies near the back, his eyes were already glassy. His breath was sharp with whatever had been in the flask they had snuck in. He pulled me toward one of the side hallways, saying that he wanted to talk. The hallway was dim, lined with folding chairs and extra decorations. He backed me against the wall, hands on my waist. "Come on, babe," he slurred, leaning in close. I pushed him away. "No, David, stop." When he didn't listen, I slapped him across the face, hard. His expression then twisted in anger. "I knew I was wasting my time with you. You can find your own fucking ride home." He then stormed off toward the parking lot. I stood there, shaking, tears welling up in my eyes. The music kept thumping through the walls like nothing had happened. I didn't want to go back out to the dance floor, looking like I had been crying. So I headed for the restroom. However, the main hallway ones were out of order. So instead of going to the ones attached directly to the gym, I went further down the hall, to the locker rooms. It was quiet back there. The music seemed to fade away the closer I got to the door. Once inside, the atmosphere was very tense. I could tell something was wrong. I then noticed something on the floor, near the bathroom stalls. Since it was dark, I couldn't tell what it was until I got closer. It was a trail of blood that began near one of the lockers leading to one of the bathroom stalls at the far end, like someone had been dragged across the floor. At first, I remember thinking that a girl student might be having some trouble with her lady parts. "Hello? Is someone in there? Are you okay?" I was met with silence, but then the stall door began slowly creaking open. Before I could say anything else, a figure wearing a bright yellow rain poncho stepped out. In his right hand, he held a long, serrated knife. Without a word, the assailant charged at me. I bolted, running toward the exit. I felt the blade cut my left arm, but I didn't stop as I shoved through the door, screaming as I burst back onto the dance floor, clutching my bleeding arm. Everyone was staring at me. I spotted our principal near the chaperone table and pushed through the crowd to get to him. Help! There's someone in the locker room. He attacked me. The rest of that night is a bit of a blur for me. The loss of blood and the shock caused me to pass out. I remember waking up later in a hospital room next to my mother. From talking with some of my friends, after I passed out, the band stopped playing, and the principal grabbed the microphone, asking for someone to call the police and for all the students to exit the gym in an orderly fashion. The police arrived a short time later. They searched the entire building, locker rooms, showers, hallways, even the parking lot. But the man in the poncho was gone. No body, no knife, just a trail of blood pooling in the bathroom stall. By morning, the news hit. A senior girl named Melissa was missing. She had been seen leaving the dance early, upset, heading toward the back of the building. No one saw her after that. Search parties combed the entire area for days. The local parks, nearby creeks, even the railroad tracks. But she was never found. Many years later, I read about a man named John Henry Horton. He was a custodian at Shawnee Mission East High School, which is in the next county over from the school I attended. Horton had been arrested for murdering a female student back in 1974. I felt ice rushing down my veins. The photos from his trial showed an older man, heavier, graying, but his eyes looked familiar to me. I'm convinced it was him who attacked me in the locker room back in 1973. The police have never connected it officially, and I feel horrible that I can't even remember the missing girl's last name. But as far as I'm aware, she was never found, and John Henry Horton was only ever convicted for murdering 13-year-old Elizabeth Wilson. September 11th, 2001 is a day that went down in history for not only America, but for the entire world. Even here in Canada, we felt the impact of that event. But personally, that day stands out for an entirely different reason. At the time, I was 12 years old, living in the Alberta countryside, where the biggest excitement was spotting a moose on the back roads. I'd woken up that day and decided that I didn't want to go to school, so I put on a severe cough and rubbed my eyes extra hard to make them look puffy. Then I told my mom I was feeling sick. She bought it, probably because Dad was out of town, and she had her hands full at the pharmacy she was working at. I stayed in bed until I heard her car leaving the driveway. As soon as she was gone, I slipped on my boots and jacket, then snuck out the back door. The woods behind our neighborhood stretched on for miles. I've explored them hundreds of times before, building forts and pretending I was the Canadian Indiana Jones, eh? That morning, I figured I'd hike up the old creek bed, maybe skip some rocks. I must have wandered further than usual, following a deer trail that twisted deeper into the thicket. The trees got denser, blocking out the sun. Everything became quiet. Too quiet. No birds chirping, no squirrels rustling. That's when I saw them. A series of tents. Not the colorful camping ones you would see at the park. These were big, white, industrial-looking, like the ones you see in disaster movies. They were clustered together in a clearing, maybe a dozen of them, with thick plastic sheeting and metal frames, hoses snaked between them, connected to generators humming low. It looked like a makeshift quarantine site. Curious, I crept closer, heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. There were these crates stacked outside one tent, labeled with words that I didn't understand. A weird smell hung in the air, like bleach mixed with something rotten. I peeked around the tree, and that's when I saw them. Two men in full hazmat suits, the kind with hoods and masks. They were hauling a heavy bag between them. One of them turned to look at me. All three of us froze in place. Then I heard muffled shouting. They then dropped the bag and reached for their waists, pulling out handguns. The first shot cracked through the air, splintering bark off the tree beside me. I yelped, ducking low as another bullet whizzed past, thudding into the dirt. Panic overwhelmed me. I bolted, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. My lungs burned, legs pumping as fast as I could. More shots rang out behind me. I ran until my sides ached. I collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping, tears streaming down my face. I hid there for hours, shaking, until the sun started dipping low. I then made my way back home. Later on, when Mom came back, I didn't say a word. How could I? Beside the fact that she would have been upset about me being out in the forest when I should have been sick in bed. What happened in New York that day had her glued to the TV. It sounded crazy, even to me. That night, as I laid in bed, staring up at the ceiling, replaying it all in my mind, the tents, the suits, the guns, I overheard my mom on the phone in the living room. She was talking to my dad. "Yeah, I heard about it when I was at work. Just awful. James stayed home today because he was feeling sick." After talking to my dad for a while longer, she mentioned something very strange. Apparently she passed about 8 garbage trucks going the opposite way on the 2-lane highway that leads directly to our neighborhood. The only other thing that way is a public park. Dump sites aren't anywhere near this area. A chill crawled up my spine. 8 garbage trucks coming from the direction of the woods? Years later, I tried to look into it, but nothing ever came up. No reports, no investigations, nothing. The only thing anyone was interested in back then was the attack on the World Trade Center. I am in no way suggesting that what I encountered in the woods had anything to do with that event. I'm not really sure what the hell was going on back there, but it was important enough to shoot at a kid and then pack everything up into garbage trucks and leave as quickly as possible. My name is Maddie. This story takes place when I was around 12 or 13. I've listened to this channel for years, but I never thought I would actually sit down and write out what happened to me. I'm from a fairly well-known small town in New Jersey. Growing up, I went through all the typical fangirl phases. Big Time Rush, Justin Bieber, One Direction, 5 Seconds of Summer, but the band that I was completely obsessed with at the time was Why Don't We? My mom has always been the super involved type. She tends to get into whatever I'm into, so she started listening to their music as well. As a surprise, my mom and dad saved up and bought tickets to see the group perform at the Radio City Music Hall in New York City. I was ecstatic. I picked out my outfit, which was a band t-shirt with pink denim shorts. I could barely contain myself. When the day came, I was scrambling to get ready. 13-year-old me genuinely believed one of the boys would spot me in the crowd of millions of girls and fall in love. We lived about 2 hours away, without traffic, and since my mom hates driving into the city, we decided to take the bus instead. We were already running late. The bus stop was about 25 minutes from our house, so we sped there, blasting Why Don't We songs along the way, laughing and singing together. We arrived just in time and rushed on board. Because we were the last ones on, all the seats were taken, except the last 2 rows, and I took the window while my mom sat in the aisle seat. As the bus was about to pull out, I suddenly caught a horrible stench creeping in from the front. I looked up and saw a ragged man, maybe in his late 60s or early 70s. His clothes were filthy and torn, and he carried a plastic bag that seemed to be adding to the smell. He looked homeless, and when he smiled, I saw his teeth, yellow, broken, and rotting. Since the bus was full, the only available seat left was directly behind my mom and I. As he walked down the aisle, his eyes scanned the passengers, then locked on me. Now, I've always been a true crime junkie, even as a kid, so the second he stepped on the bus, I was on high alert. I noticed where he sat, right behind me, and I couldn't help but glance back at him. He must have noticed, because our eyes met. Something in his expression changed. He then leaned toward my mom's ear. "Your daughter is so beautiful. I'm going to marry her when we get off this bus," he whispered. My stomach turned. I felt his hand gripping the seat behind me, his fingers tightening until the metal creaked. I only had one earbud in, but I heard every word. My mom froze. What could she even do? She's only 4'11". We exchanged a quick glance, and she shook her head, silently telling me not to react. We whispered about how creepy it was, and decided just to ignore him. She asked for one of my AirPods to tune out his disgusting comments. For a while, he just muttered to himself, and we tried to push it out of our minds, focusing on the excitement of the concert. Halfway through the ride, my mom pulled out her phone to take selfies of us. She literally takes pictures of everything. She's the kind of person that would take pictures of a rock. But as she held the phone up, I noticed something at the top of the screen. The man had leaned forward, practically pressing his face between our seats to get in the picture. I panicked and tried to whisper a warning, but before I could, my mom saw him on the screen and yelped. She shot up from her seat. The man just sat there, laughing this awful, manic laugh. While the nearby passengers turned to look, I remember feeling frozen, terrified for both of us, and even for the woman who was sitting across from him. He eventually stopped laughing and sank back into his seat, mumbling under his breath. No one said a word. They never do. And my mom and I just sat there, tense and silent. I texted her instead of speaking, telling her how scared I was, and she replied telling me to stay calm and just ignore him for a while longer. 15 minutes later, I started to relax more. We hadn't heard anything from the man behind us. That was until I felt something hot on the right side of my neck. I jerked forward and looked back. The man was leaning so close that his face nearly touched the gap between the seats. "Your daughter is so perfect. I'm going to have a family with her." My mom spun around and stood up, her voice shaking, but was loud enough for the whole bus to hear. "She's only 12 years old. Leave her alone, and don't speak to us again." For a second, I thought I was going to lunge at her, but thankfully he didn't. He just sank back down, now silent. When we finally neared our stop, I felt a wave of relief. I thought it was over. As people began filing off the bus, my mom and I had our stuff ready. We were immediately expecting to hop off. But right before we did, I felt him lean in close again, his voice low and disturbingly cheerful. "As soon as we get off this bus, I'm going to rape your daughter." I felt every drop of blood drain from my body. I couldn't breathe. My mom's face went pale in pure terror. I started praying in my head, even though I'm not very religious. I just wanted to get out of there. As soon as there was enough space between us and him, we booked it. We ran off that bus as fast as we could and sprinted down the street, desperate to disappear into the crowd. We ducked into a nearby boutique store, crouching behind the racks of clothing. Through the glass, we saw him limping down the sidewalk, peering into the windows, searching for us. When he looked into our store, I held my breath, but thank God he didn't spot us. We waited another 15 minutes before slipping out and finding a security guard who walked us the rest of the way. The rest of that night went by without seeing him again. but the fear has stayed with me ever since. To any young girls hearing this, please be aware of your surroundings. I used to listen to scary stories thinking, that could never happen to me, but it did. It can happen to anyone. I've been a long-time listener and a huge fan of your channel. I wanted to share a true story from my junior year of college during the COVID-19 lockdowns when campuses were letting only a handful of students back in. But since I was an RA, I was chosen to return. The campus was mostly desolate, but I didn't mind it. My school owns a stretch of forest where the trails began on private property, but eventually fed into public pathways. To avoid feeling trapped in my dorm, I would go for long walks there. It was winter, and the trails were frozen. A river ran alongside the walking trail, its surface sealed over with ice. The trails were typically empty, and I would usually have my headphones in, music blasting. But I still tried to stay aware of my surroundings. After all, I'm an avid horror story listener. I don't know exactly how long the trail is, but toward the end, there's a bench. During the springtime, students would gather there to swim. For me, the bench served more as a landmark. It meant that the trail was about to get more narrow and elevated, with the river running stronger beside it. Even during winter, you could still see the water moving beneath a thin layer of ice. The trail eventually ended in a parking lot, and as I got closer, I saw someone. At first, there was nothing unusual about him. He looked to be normal, maybe late 30s, early 40s, white, with a beanie, denim jeans, and a light-colored jacket on. Nothing about his appearance screamed dangerous in the moment, but the second I saw him, my stomach tightened. Something in me just reacted out of pure instinct. I didn't want to be near this person, alone, on an isolated trail. So I discreetly lowered my music and kept moving toward the lot. He passed me, and I let out a quiet sigh of relief. Perhaps I was just talking myself into a worst-case scenario. Since I had to walk back the same way I came, I waited for a while so the man could get far enough ahead so I wouldn't end up right behind him. When I finally started walking again, I kept my pace slow. I told myself I was overthinking this whole ordeal. Too many horror stories in my head. But everything changed when I got back to the bench. He was sitting there, seemingly waiting for me. This was the middle of winter, freezing cold, and he was just sitting there. I didn't say anything to him. I just kept moving forward, but after a short while, I risked a casual glance over my shoulder. My stomach dropped. He was now walking behind me. I still had a long way to go before I'd reach the campus, and all I could think was, I can't run. Running would only alert him that I knew he was following me. Plus, the trail is covered in frost. If I tried to sprint, I might slip, and then I'd be done for. So instead, I quickened my pace, forcing myself not to look back too much. Normally, I carried either my X-Acto blade or my heavy hydro flask for protection. But on that day, of course, I had left both behind. I cursed myself under my breath. Sometimes there would be other people on the trail, but since this was a lockdown period, it was just me and him. No one else. I debated calling campus security, or even a friend, but all I could do was focus on just making it back. I think my stalker noticed I was picking up pace, because when I glanced back again, he let out this low chuckle. That sound made me shiver, more so than the cold weather. I was nearing the campus portion of the trail when I saw a woman with a huge dog coming in the opposite direction. I can't describe the relief that washed over me. I was ready to tell her that the man was following me and that she should go get some help or sick her dog on him. but when I turned around once more, he was gone. Just like that, out of thin air. I didn't waste any time. There were 3 separate entrances from the campus to the trail, and I darted up the closest one, cutting straight for the dorms. Even as I walked back to my room, I kept glancing over my shoulder, my nerves still on edge. Honestly, if that woman and her dog hadn't shown up, I think he would have continued following me, and if he hadn't made a move, I don't think I could have done much about it. Once inside, I called the campus security, trying to report a strange man on campus, but they just brushed it off and said that they would send someone to go check it out, and then hung up without even asking for a description. The scariest part of this was the feeling of being trapped. Not being able to run, knowing that he was right behind me. When I called my parents and told them, they just scolded me, telling me that I shouldn't be walking in the woods alone. Young girls go missing all the time in those situations. Funny enough, that didn't stop me from going back on the trails. But after that day, I never left without my X-Acto blade in my pocket. I've attached a short video showing what the frozen path and river looked like that winter, as well as a photo I took at the end of the trail in the parking lot. I only recently realized that the photo actually captures the man who ended up following me. Though he's tiny and blurry, you can spot him if you zoom in close enough.
When I was about 4, this was in 1997, my mum and brothers went to a water park on a weekend during the summer. The park was set up so that you would walk through the entrance and run directly into a food court with the little information or map station there. To the left was inside an arcade area with a roller coaster, a little one, directly outside of it, and behind the arcade building was an enormous wave pool. To the right of the entrance was the kiddie park, and then behind the kiddie park was a lazy river and all the water slides with it. Since my brothers were older and they wanted to ride the big slides, my mum and me split from them to head to the kiddie park. I remember playing for a little while, making some friends with some of the kids, when this one little boy asked me if I wanted to go to the wave pool. Since I was little, my mum told me that I was not allowed to go to the wave pool, at least without an adult, so I told him that I couldn't. He then said that it's not a problem. My dad is already waiting for us, and he's already told my mum that he was going to watch us. Well, being a dumb kid and marveling at the wave pool since we got there, I was pretty much sold and followed him over there. My mum probably didn't notice at the time because the lawn chair that she was sitting in around the kiddie pool was being blocked by little kid slides and billions of other little children. But we headed to the wave pool and met the kid's dad. He immediately took my hand and guided me into the wave pool. I remember only being there for like 2 minutes tops until he picked me up and carried me back out of the pool. I don't think that I even asked where we were going, but I assumed the food court because that's where we were headed. I then remember reaching the entrance gates and a lifeguard approached us and asked if my name was so-and-so, and I said yes, and started crying because I guess I thought that I was in trouble. The lifeguard then grabs me from the dude, and I see my mum running up sobbing. Years later, we're revisiting this story, and she tells me that she noticed that I was missing pretty quickly and told a lifeguard to close off the entrance to the park. I was wearing a yellow bathing suit with pink flowers on it and 2 yellow ribbons in my hair, so the description gave me away instantly when the man was carrying me out, that is. I asked my mum about the kid, and she had no idea what I was talking about. She said that it was just the singular man, and apparently he ran to his car in the parking lot as soon as the lifeguard took me out of his arms. In other words, there was no kid with him. One night, while I was about 17 or maybe 18, I was living in this old Victorian home on the top floor. I lived alone. You could afford to live alone back then. And it was a creepy place. I loved the upstairs. It was very nicely done, and it was only $279 a month, close to the downtown of the city that I was living in. Now, one night, I was unexpectedly in for the evening. I had a full-time job, a part-time job as well, and a very active social life, so being home alone was pretty rare for me. It was raining very hard that day, and I remember looking outside and watching the puddles get bigger and bigger. I went to bed quite early. Suddenly, though, I woke up abruptly after what felt like I had been sleeping for a long time. It was completely dark, almost pitch black in my bedroom. There was just a bit of light in the corner of my room from the streetlight outside. I looked to my digital bedside clock. I had only been asleep for 5 minutes at the most, though. I kind of got chills then, and I heard what I can only describe as like a hissing sound. I looked up to the ceiling of my bedroom, and there was a black blob-like form that was just moving and changing size and slowly making its way to me. By the time the realization that it was coming to me hit me, I became unable to move my limbs, my body. I could not talk or scream. I just laid there, unable to do anything but watch it get closer to me. When it reached me, it just kind of settled on me. I could feel its weight. I couldn't close my eyes. I so desperately wanted to, but I just couldn't. The terror that I felt cannot be described, though. The evil that I felt from this form was immense, and I have not felt anything like this, that kind of evil, in my life ever. After what seemed like hours, though, suddenly it was gone. My room got brighter and I was able to move again. I checked my clock, but again, only 5 minutes had passed. This experience happened 2 more times while I was living in that old Victorian house. I later learned, though, through research at the library, that I had apparently been visited by an incubus. When I returned to the city that I grew up in and lived in that house, I drive by it. It's still standing, and I don't know if it's divided up into 3 separate apartments now, but it's a lot more run down, that's for sure. A lot of strange things would happen in those rooms. Things would go missing, and I'd find them in very odd places. And as far as I'm concerned, that house, it's definitely haunted. I was traveling with some friends on some 4x4 trails in southern Idaho. We were camping out one night, singing music around a campfire for quite a while, and my friends decided to go to bed eventually. My ex and I stayed up a little bit longer, hanging out around the fire and just enjoying the atmosphere. Then suddenly, everything just got dead silent, like the world got put on mute. I'm no stranger to this phenomenon. It generally happens when there's a predator nearby, and being in bear country, I had my bear spray on me, so I wasn't too worried. My ex and I continued to enjoy the fire, though, until we heard someone way off in the distance say, "honey," 3 times. You could tell it was far away, but it also had the sound of a whisper rather than a yell, an almost questioning tone, like it was a woman calling out for her husband. My friend peeked out of his rooftop tent and asked if we were the ones calling out, but we weren't. The weirdest thing, though, is that it just didn't sound right. More so something that sounds like a woman calling out honey, but not actually a human woman. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but the more rational side of us decided that it may have been a hiker or something. The moon was full, so the idea of a couple hiking at night, especially since we weren't too far from the nearest town, wasn't too unlikely, I guess. My friend and his girlfriend, they decided to rejoin us for a little bit, and they also commented on the lack of wildlife sounds. We sat for a few more minutes before, again, hearing that honey sound. My friend agreed that it didn't sound right at all. He called out hello just in case there was some poor lost woman somewhere, but nothing responded. A few minutes later, we heard the same call, but from the complete opposite direction. With how far it sounded, There is just no way some lost hiker could have circled all the way around our camp that quickly. We lit up our floodlights, and we quickly booked it out of the area, and ended up cutting our overland trip very short. I still have no idea who or what made those noises, and it really still creeps me the heck out. Honestly, too, I'm really not sure if I'll be traveling to southern Idaho ever again. Now, I know that this sounds fantastical and wild, and honestly, I couldn't disagree. This is in fairly remote backcountry, West Virginia, which is known for being old and haunted. It was experienced entirely by the two of us, but the worst parts by all four. This led to all four of us at some point battling personal issues in our lives that I believe stemmed directly from this encounter. The following is, at least to my memory and what I've been able to corroborate with the other people that were there, 100% accurate and true. So when I was 17, 2004, we had a bad experience camping near haunted train tunnels and sites of sudden tragic death. The history of the immediate 1 square mile area is that mother and son drowning in the creek nearby, drug dealers killed in state police shootout at a nearby hunting cabin, and many years before, cheap laborers had been killed building this double set of train tunnels. They were actually buried in a long-forgotten little graveyard nearby the tunnels that has since been found and restored. We decided to go camping before graduation as a friend group of 4, just to do something one last time before we all went our separate ways in life. This is a private property on the backside of a big hill around which the creek flows in a huge several-mile-long bend. A camp set up and fire going. Shortly after nightfall, my cousin and I sat back on the creek bed, maybe 20 yards away from the camp spotlight, fish in the water. We then began to hear a sort of rhythmic sloshing sound. A slosh of what sounded like somebody wading through the water, maybe halfway up to their shin deep. So we shined the light around upstream, and we then spotted symmetrically and rhythmically consistent disturbances made by what looked and sounded like invisible feet or legs sloshing toward us. When we would turn our spotlights off, it would start again. It would then stop when illuminated, and whatever it was definitely reacting to us. And this was the first ice bucket stomach clench moment we knew that this was not fish and could not rationalize what was actually happening. This scared us pretty badly, but we decided best to be kept to ourselves and join the others gathered at the fire suddenly. As we made our way back, we heard the sloshing make its way to where we were on the bank and the noise stopped. Given the speed that we witnessed it moving and how far it was from us when we were watching it, it must have sped up to make it to the bank that we were on in the amount of time that it took us to get to the camp. Others at the camp heard it as well and figured that we'd either gotten in or somehow riled up some fish, but we just played it off in the end. And as crazy as it sounded and looked like an invisible person wading towards us through the water. After the noise ended at the creek bank, we then all saw the tall grass disturbed as something that we couldn't see ran around the foliage perimeter of our circularly cleared campsite. Now, this could have been an animal, I admit, but whatever it was fast. We then began to hear what sounded like a man talking to us, as in speaking into the ear of each person, the left ear if that matters. At first it sounded like garble really, but after maybe 15 to 20 seconds, we could make out the words saying we shouldn't be there and we needed to leave, before finally addressing us directly and saying slightly more forcefully, "You need to leave." Obviously, as you can imagine, this was absolutely terrifying, and at first we thought that it was a person or group of people out there walking up on our camp and that it was dangerous. We were all frozen with fear though, but then adrenaline suddenly hit. As we freaked out and started to run to our ATV, all 4 of us saw what we all described as a tall black shadow man wearing what looked like a hat, relaxing against the front of our ATV. It straightened up when we saw it, and it saw us, allegedly, and it just sort of hung there staring at us for a few seconds. No feet, the legs ended in sort of wavy lines, like looking above the fire at the heat waves. It stood out against the dark night behind it, though, and it was definitely there. The girl screamed, which broke our fear freeze, and it zipped like the Flash back towards the train tunnels people had died in. Interestingly, when we went to start the ATV, it sort of turned over sluggishly as if the battery had been slightly drained, despite working fine not long before when we rode it down. This entire event happened over the course of, I don't know, I want to say maybe 5 to 10 minutes, and within an hour of the sun going down. After putting our story out there, I received a lot of feedback from people as well who have also had bad encounters in this area over many years. Even a guy I worked with who didn't know that we knew this area told me that my uncle had hired him to trap in that area, and it was the only place that he didn't check traps alone at night. He said that it was almost like the animals leave the place at night and it was completely quiet out there. No less than a month later, my uncle who owns the property was up on the hill raccoon hunting at night with a dog. At some point, the dog was on a rock face up above him and actually knocked a large rock loose that fell and struck my uncle in the side of the neck. This understandably messed him up pretty bad and paralyzed almost his entire body, but he still had limited functionality on his left side. We could never figure out how he got himself back to his ATV and turned it over and drove himself out of there because, really, he just wasn't capable of that anymore. It wasn't until probably maybe 2 or 3 years later, around Halloween, when my story makes its rounds on the local Facebook groups, that my uncle texted my mother out of the blue. You have no reason to believe my uncle's character reference, but honestly, he is a salt-of-the-earth, hunting, farming, working sort of man, even working past his retirement as a millionaire. He's honest, funny, and just incredibly a stand-up guy. He is easygoing, but also no nonsense for sure. In his text to my mother, though, he said, "I've never told anybody this before, and I probably won't again. But the man in the hat that the kids saw at the creek that night helped pick me up off the ground and put me back on the ATV and turned me around." Until I heard that, I had always assumed that the Shadow Man was the one who was trying to scare us out of there, but thinking back on it, maybe he was the one whispering to us, telling us that we needed to leave and possibly avoid something scarier and more dangerous. Although I honestly have no idea what could have been scarier than that. Here and talk about my house and some of the weird stuff that's been going on recently in it. I've lived in this house alone for about 5 years now, I would say. Nothing really noteworthy happened until 2021, and it really wasn't anything crazy. Like small stuff. My garage door would be open when I thought that I'd closed it. The sink is running, cupboards open, etc. I started noticing other stuff happening around that time as well, though. I would think that I'd hear footsteps around my house, but it was always something that I thought that I could play off as just being tired since I work full-time along with college and all that. It didn't happen all too often as well, so I didn't really worry too much about it. But it started to become more frequent as years have gone by, and recently a few things have happened that have definitely got me pretty spooked, to the point that I've stayed at a friend's house because of them. I'll share them now, but I'm really not sure what I want out of this. Maybe some clarity or something, or some advice on what to do, but yeah, here's what happened. So the first thing that happened was around August of 2024. I was sitting in my office room doing some homework and playing some music. I started to hear what I thought sounded like a woman at my door. Now, I note, My next door neighbor is a single mother, and she goes on walks past my house literally every night. Figuring that she might be at my door asking for something, I open the door, only to find no one there. I close the door and sit back down, and over the next week or so, I started hearing what I thought was a woman talking just out of earshot. I would think that it was my TVs, but I keep them off when I'm not using them. I was pretty stumped and frustrated over it as well. It all built up to one night where I'm laying in bed and I hear this same voice, lady just out of earshot, talking at my bedroom door. Tired and creeped out, I jumped out of bed to check, only to find when opening my door, nobody was there. It chilled me enough to where goosebumps formed. I locked my bedroom door, which I never do, and got back into bed. Maybe 5 minutes later, it started happening again. I got back up and literally screamed, "Leave me alone," packed a bag, and I ended up spending the night at a friend's house a little ways down the street, and it hasn't happened since. The next incident happened about a month ago. Doing homework in my room, all of a sudden my home phone starts ringing. Problem is that I haven't had a phone connected since the hurricane swept through Florida, and have had no reason to put it back in. I quickly jumped out of my bed, shuffled out to check the phone, and sure enough, it's ringing at me. I picked it up and it immediately died. I have absolutely no clue how this could have rung as well, unless the phone battery is jacked up or something. Since then, I have thrown the phone away because, to heck with that, right? Now, this next one is the one that made me want to come on here and talk about my experience thus far. This happened about a week ago. So, I have a boxer puppy who turns 1 on Saturday, by the way, who is usually pretty relaxed. I've never seen him frightened because, frankly, he just doesn't even know what's going on half the time. It's probably about 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm chilling in my kitchen. Knox is laying next to me, probably wanting my food. Eventually, he walks away, and as I finally indulge into said food, he stops about 6 feet from my garage door and starts growling. Like tail up, looking like he's going to bite someone, kind of growl. Mind you, I've never seen him growl like this, not once, so I was a little bit freaked out from the get-go, to say the least. I try calling him back over, but he is absolutely dialed into whatever he's growling at. I start walking over slowly to him. I turn the corner to look at my door, and it literally slams. It sounds like a giant object slammed right into my door, loud as anything. My dog jumps back and runs to go hide in my room. I, on the other hand, open my door, run into my garage to see if someone had tried to break in, only to see that everything was perfectly quiet. The door was fine too. Needless to say, I grabbed the dog up and we drove to stay at my friend's house for the night again after that. Since then too, I've been on edge the past week being at my own home. It feels like I have to watch my back constantly now because something just might happen. I'm losing sleep over this, and honestly, I really just don't know what to do at this point.
The story takes place in a remote area of the UK, but to protect the people involved, I won't say the exact location. My friend Zara, a British Pakistani influencer, had just recently had her second child, and her husband had gone away on a golf holiday, leaving her alone with the 2 children. She was used to being left alone, as her husband often worked away from home too, and would often go away on vacation with his friends, leaving her alone to take care of the children. It was a stormy October night, and there was lots of thunder, so it was pretty noisy. She started to feel uncomfortable as it was getting dark early and her house is fairly isolated. So all the noise from outside was, getting to her. At around 9 p.m., she had just finished a cup of coffee in the kitchen. The children were asleep and Zara was making sure the house was locked up for the night. She went back into the kitchen and she saw that the back door was slightly open. She started to approach it, but then felt very dizzy, stumbling, and she fainted. Zara slowly regained consciousness and sat on a chair in the kitchen. The first thing she was aware of was how heavily she was breathing through her nose. She felt something covering her mouth, and after twisting her lips, she realized it was sticky tape that was sealing her lips. Zara started to panic and tried to talk and shout, but the gag around her mouth was preventing this. She struggled to move as well, as she could feel her hands were taped together behind the chair, and when she looked down, she was duct taped to the chair and her feet were taped together as well. Her hard breathing popped the duct tape covering her mouth in and out. Then the lamp over her head switched on. Standing there before her was a medium-built man with a hood on and a scarf covering his lower face. At this point, Zara was obviously petrified and was mainly concerned for her 2 children sleeping upstairs. The man then said,
"I won't hurt you, but do you keep money in the house?"
Zara mumbled a "no" against the tape. The man had a large bag which he had filled with items such as Dubai jewelry from around the house. The next thing he said sent a chill up Zara's back.
"Don't worry, your kids are still asleep."
He then went to leave through the back kitchen door, and before exiting turned and said,
"I just want you to know I'm sorry for this."
Then he left. Zara struggled for a few minutes and then eventually freed her mouth from the tape by twisting her mouth and biting on the tape. She immediately ran to check on her children who had both slept through the entire ordeal. She phoned the police and the man was eventually apprehended later that week. As mentioned, Zara has an online presence, so the man was aware of this and was aware that she was often left alone. He admitted to gaining entry to the back door and drugged her coffee, which explains why she fainted. The burglar said that he had lost his business and was in a desperate situation with the state of the economy, but that he didn't wish to harm anyone. Zara bears a strong resemblance to Kim Kardashian, and the fact that she's a micro-influencer is likely what gave him this idea, as a similar situation happened with Kim Kardashian just a few years earlier. Zara is a very strong, feisty young woman, so she did eventually learn to live with the situation. However, it's not something you can ever fully recover from. She couldn't help but feel sorry for the man who did this, but the feeling she had when she was in that position is something she'll never forget. Mid-fall of last year, I agreed to a babysitting gig, as I'm known around my neighborhood as a relatively available person to watch kids. I personally don't really love kids, but I definitely think it's fun to be a mom for a couple of hours. I went over at around 3 to meet the parents and children who lived a few minutes away from me. I had to drive there as the road to connect our streets wasn't finished, so I couldn't walk like I wanted to. This is important to the story. I walked up to the door and was welcomed in, and the family was kind, of course. 3 children, 2 older kids and a toddler who I can't remember the specific ages of, but it's not too important. The parents eventually headed out to the sports game they were going to, which I was aware was going to be several hours as they were also going to the bar after the game. So their plan was to arrive at 11 to 11:30 p.m., which was fine with me as I tend to stay up later than that anyways. The first few hours are normal. I make them dinner and we head to the basement to play and watch some movies like any other babysitter would do. It started to get dark and time had slipped my mind. And as I went back upstairs, I had realized how late it had gotten because the house was quite literally more windows than walls. The house had a daylight basement, so yes, there were windows downstairs, but I was facing away from them, so I didn't see the sky fade into the nighttime. I went upstairs and checked every single window in the house, as well as all the locks, closets, and any spot where someone could be hiding, as I'm extremely paranoid. And I also like to check for the kids because they had also mentioned me needing to scare the monsters away, which is how most kids tell you they're scared. But I was also scared, of course. I want to mention that I'm in the top 4% of viewers for Southern Cannibal, and I was thinking of this channel when the attempted break-in took place. Anyways, I cleared the house of any creepers and I went back downstairs to get everyone changed and ready for bed. As I was wrapping up, I had heard some neighbors' dogs howling, which I wasn't too concerned about as I've babysitting pet set for the dogs and kids in that neighborhood. and I knew it wasn't too much to be concerned about since there are foxes all over the yard since there's lots of fields and hills where I live at. I finished everything and took everyone in for bedtime and head upstairs to go have a snack since it was about 9:45 and I hadn't had dinner with the kids because I didn't want to eat all their food, and I figured I'd just wait so I could raid the pantry without them asking for chips or a soda too. My favorite part of being a babysitter is of course the free food. As I headed upstairs, I immediately remembered that I'd completely forgotten to lock the front door, as I was so worried about checking everything else, so I quickly walked to the door and locked it. It's a modern lock, the type that you need to put a code in, but there was also a top lock for extra security, which probably saved me from a horrific night. The windows around the door are the frosty type for privacy, so I couldn't see any distinct figures, but I noticed that there was nothing abnormal out there. I walked to the bathroom to then let out my poop I had been holding in for hours at that point. Sorry guys, but when you gotta go, you gotta go. The bathroom is almost directly behind the front door but slightly to the side, so from the bathroom door I had a straight view onto the porch steps and a little bit of the rest of the front yard, but again no distinct figures, just blobs. I finished doing my poop, which took me a few minutes as I scrolled on Instagram Reels longer than I actually shat. I opened the door and immediately I was so grateful that I had just gone to the restroom, as I for sure would have shit myself in that moment if I hadn't. I see a figure outside the door, and I freeze in case they can see me too moving inside. I watch as they slowly cup up their hands against the side window, and I see it's a darker skinned man, which will be important in a moment. I watched him walk back down the steps, and luckily I had turned every light off in the home. So maybe he thought there was nobody there since my car was parked across the street, so it didn't look like any cars were actually at the house I was in. As I see him move away, I go to look out the peephole of the door, and I see him cross the street, do the same thing to my car, and try the door handles. Within a few minutes, he wanders off down into the street out of sight. There's an old folks' home near the houses, and I assumed it was possibly a confused elder, which has happened before in this area. I make sure everything is locked again, and I go to the pantry to then grab some food, when I turn around and see the little boy had come upstairs and said he saw someone in the backyard, and my heart damn near stopped. I said it was just a tree or bush moving in the wind, and he was definitely partially awake, as when I walked him downstairs to his bed again to tuck him in, he was passed out in seconds. I then close all the curtains all the way down again, when I see shoe prints in the mud by the back sliding door. The backyards in this area are rarely ever finished, since the houses are all new, so most of the landscapes are half grass, half dirt from the construction. I realized the man had probably scoped out the downstairs first and seen nothing going on and then moved upstairs to the door. I checked the peephole upstairs to see slight mud prints on the front porch, where my suspicion was confirmed. As I'm looking, I see the man emerge from the side of the garage again, and my stomach turns with disgust. But he kept walking through the yards of the neighborhood, which I found extremely odd. I was thinking of calling the police, but technically he hasn't done anything wrong other than loitering maybe, but there's no cameras to see how long he's been on the property. Plus, I didn't want to ruin the parents' night and make them come home early. I continued eating my snack in the kitchen on the floor, in the most private area of this completely windowed house where it was impossible to hide, when I hear the sound of the electric lock buzzing. There's a specific sound when the door is successfully unlocked, and to my horror, it makes that damn sound. I stop breathing as I crawl out of the corner and grab the first thing I see, which is a serrated knife I had used to cut up some bread earlier for sandwiches. I then realized I had slid the top lock over, which prevented anyone from opening the door anyways when I could still hear this freak trying to enter the house. I walked to the guest bedroom to get a better view. The front door is tucked between the guest room and garage on each side, so there was a window on the very front of the guest room that gave me a good view of the porch to see the man. This guy had the worst skin I had ever seen, not related to his color of course, but there were deep marks from what looked like picking needles and who knows what else. I see his hair. It's these extremely grown out locks, dirty hands covered in mud, and finally no shoes. I was peeking through the blinds so the man didn't see me. As his feet were pressed up towards the bottom of the door, I quickly crawled to the door again, and as quickly as I could, tried to cut the rubber seal off the door that keeps the weather out. As I get it off, I shove the knife under the door and start going back and forth, and I hear him run off. I immediately told the parents, and they were already heading home, and I decided to explain to them what happened and why their door has no way to keep out the door air now. I have no clue what this man's intentions were, or if I actually got him with the knife. Months later, I saw on the news of my city that a man had been charged for drug trafficking and attempted burglary in my city on other homes. I know it's wrong to keep this to myself, but I have zero evidence of this actually happening, as the family hadn't set up any cameras anywhere, and neither had the neighbors since these homes were new and nobody thought to install them or get a Ring camera, which is weird because in today's world, I would never go without cameras at every entrance of my own house. I hope nobody else was seriously harmed, and I hope the man has received the proper punishments and/or mental help he needs. I ended up getting paid extra, but I also never got to have the snacks that I'd been eyeing down the whole evening before this disaster. Thanks for sharing all these stories to help people be more aware. It's truly helped me learn how to keep myself safe in my own home by setting up the proper alarms and cameras, and also how to recognize weird or odd behaviors from others. Happy holidays, everyone. Hi, everyone. This happened several years ago, and for a long time I stopped talking about it altogether. Not because it didn't matter anymore, because people tend to respond with hindsight instead of empathy. They ask what you should have done without understanding how fear rewires your brain in the moment. But I think people hearing this will understand. So here it is. At the time, I was living in a second-floor apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a quiet area, the kind of place where neighbors waved politely but kept to themselves. I worked as a medical assistant in a small clinic, and my schedule usually had me home by early evening. That afternoon, I came home just after 5 p.m. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and let it close behind me with a dull click. I tossed my purse on the counter, set my phone beside it, and kicked off my shoes. I didn't bother locking the door, something I'd done countless times before without a second thought. My partner was supposed to be home within the hour away. That habit ended that day. I walked down the hallway toward the bedroom, sorting laundry and half listening to the hum of the traffic outside. I was in the middle of hanging up clothes when I had heard the front door open. I smiled instinctively and called out, "Hey, I'm back here." There was no response. That uneasy feeling, the one you can't quite explain, settled in immediately. I stepped out of the bedroom and into the living room. Someone was standing near the kitchen counter. He wasn't masked. He wasn't holding anything. He was just there. A man that I'd never seen before, older than me, watching me silently like I had surprised him. For a brief foolish moment, I wondered if he had the wrong apartment. That thought vanished when he didn't apologize or move. I raised my voice and I told him immediately that he needed to leave. I tried to sound confident, tried to make myself bigger than I felt. He didn't react. Instead, he reached down and picked up my phone, then my wallet, then my keys. One by one, calmly, like he had all the time in the world. That was when panic really took over. The only other way I could contact anyone was my laptop sitting on the desk by the window. I rushed toward it, grabbed it, and ran past him toward the bathroom. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as I heard footsteps behind me. Within seconds, the handle rattled. I ran into the closet, locked that door too, and dropped to the floor. My hands were shaking so badly I almost couldn't open the laptop. I logged into the first messaging app I could think of and sent frantic messages to my partner, begging him to call the police. He replied quickly. He said help was on the way. He said that he was leaving work also. I sat there, knees pulled into my chest, listening. The bathroom door opened. Footsteps moved closer. The closet door shook violently, then stopped. I didn't scream. I didn't cry out. I didn't fight. I was frozen completely. Utterly frozen, convinced that if the door gave way, that would be the end. Now, usually when people hear this part, they often ask why I didn't do more. I don't have a satisfying answer. Fear doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like stillness. The noises moved away. I heard things breaking, cabinets opening, glass shattering. Time stretched and warped until I had no idea how long I'd been there. I messaged my mother. She lived states away. I told her I loved her. I asked her to keep replying even if I couldn't respond right away. I didn't want to be alone. Eventually, the front door opened again, this time followed by shouting. I recognized my partner's voice. Moments later, everything blurred. I remember the intruder being restrained. I remember sitting on the floor, shaking uncontrollably. I remember the police lights through the windows. The officers arrived way later than I expected, though I know fear distorts time. They took the man away, and I got my belongings back. I answered questions mechanically. As one officer was leaving, he told me that I should always lock my door. At the time, it felt like blame. Later, I just understood it was experience speaking. The incident itself lasted less than an hour. The aftermath lasted years. Even after we moved to a quieter town, to a safer building, to a place with only one entrance, I couldn't sleep. Every sound felt threatening. Every night felt like I was waiting for something terrible to just happen again. Eventually, I realized that the fear wasn't about where I lived. It was about how helpless I still felt. So I did something uncomfortable. I walked into a self-defense studio and signed up. At first, I stayed quiet. I stood in the back. I avoided attention. But over time, slowly and deliberately, I rebuilt something I thought I'd lost forever. My confidence, control, trust in myself. I've trained for years now. The person I was in that closet still exists, but she no longer defines me. I don't judge her anymore. She survived the only way she knew how, and now I know more. If you've experienced something like this and you still feel haunted by it, I want you to know you're not weak and you're not broken. Healing doesn't look the same for everyone, and there's no timeline for it. Thank you all for listening. If sharing this helps even one person feel less alone, then it was worth it. Stay safe. This is still the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. What haunts me isn't just what occurred, but how narrowly I avoided something far worse. Sometimes I replay it in my head and realize that a single different choice, a single second longer, and I might not be here to tell this story at all. This happened about 4 years ago. It was when I was in my early 20s and still in university. On paper, my life was stable. I lived in a quiet neighborhood most people considered safe, tree-lined streets, families out walking in the evenings, nothing that ever made the news. I shared a modest apartment with my younger cousin, and we had an aging spoiled cat who believed the entire building belonged to him. Growing up, I'd always loved combat sports. I wasn't exceptional, but I was committed. I trained in whatever was available. Boxing, jiu-jitsu, a bit of karate, anything that taught me discipline and awareness. Training gave me confidence in my body and my reactions. But when I moved to the city for school, reality took over. Long commutes, endless coursework, late nights. Slowly, training slipped out of my routine until it became something I told myself I'd get back to someday. Our apartment just sat above ground level. The back of the building faced a neglected strip of greenery, a tangled mess of trees and brush that separated our building from an old service road. There was a narrow metal staircase attached to our kitchen balcony that led straight down into the shadows. It wasn't something I liked to think about, but we always kept that door locked. Always, except when the cat wanted out. My days were exhausting. I left home late in the morning and often didn't return until after dark. So when a friend offered to drive me home one evening, cutting my commute in half, I was relieved. I arrived much earlier than usual, just as the sky was dimming into dusk. The building felt strangely still. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and called out my cousin's name out of habit. No answer. This wasn't unusual. He was often out and doing things. But something about the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was so tense. Only one lamp was on near the entryway, The rest of the apartment was dark. I remember pausing, my hand still on the door, listening. Nothing. Yet my stomach tightened, that familiar instinctive warning that something wasn't right. I moved slowly down the hallway toward the bedrooms. That's when I heard it. A door slammed, hard enough to echo throughout the apartment. It came from my cousin's room. At first, my mind scrambled for a normal explanation. You know, maybe he had been showering and just panicked when he heard me come in. Maybe he was playing some kind of a prank. But then I heard voices, low hurried whispers, not playful, not familiar. They sounded urgent, pressed. My heart started pounding. I became painfully aware of every sound I made, the creak on the floor, my own breathing. Before I reached his door, I glanced into my bedroom. It looked like a bomb had gone off. My drawers were pulled out, clothes scattered everywhere. Books lay face down on the floor. My desk was bare, as if someone had swept everything off of it in one violent motion. That was the moment everything clicked. Someone had been inside my home. Fear didn't freeze me, it flipped a switch. I didn't think. I didn't calculate risks. My body just moved before my brain could catch up. I slammed my shoulder into my cousin's bedroom door with everything I had. The door burst open. The room was empty but destroyed. Mattress askew, closet torn apart, belongings strewn everywhere. Whoever had been whispering moments ago was gone. I sprinted toward the kitchen, adrenaline roaring in my ears, and threw open the balcony door. Just in time, I saw a man scrambling down the metal staircase. He stumbled when he hit the ground, almost collapsing before regaining his balance. He looked ordinary. That's what terrified me most. No mask, no weapon, just a regular man who had been rifling through my life moments earlier. I screamed, raw, furious, wordless, and he bolted into the darkness beyond the trees. He was gone. The adrenaline drained fast, replaced by shaking panic. Then I realized what was missing. It was my laptop. I tore through the apartment in a frenzy, sobbing, pulling things apart that were already destroyed. Now, that laptop wasn't just an object. It held my schoolwork, my personal files, my connection to my friends that I talked to every day. Losing it felt like I was losing my footing entirely. I collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath, my hands numb. I called my mom. I don't remember what I said, only that she kept asking me to slow down. Later, she told me that my words were all jumbled, switching languages mid-sentence without warning. The police arrived eventually. They asked questions, took notes. I looked around. Their presence felt hollow, like a formality rather than protection. That's when we found it. A pillowcase stuffed with our belongings abandoned in the chaos. Both laptops, jewelry, and old electronics. Inches away from where I'd been searching, unseen because my mind was still spiraling. Nothing ever came out of the investigation. We removed the staircase and installed motion lights. I tried to rebuild a sense of safety, but something fundamental had shifted. For months afterward, every shadow made my muscles tense. Every unfamiliar face near my bus stop sparked irrational fear and anger. I caught myself scanning crowds, replaying the scene, imagining what I would do if I ever saw that man again. Eventually, we moved, and I went back to training. Not because I believed I could overpower danger, but because I refused to live feeling helpless. Training grounded me. It gave me some kind of control over my breath, my reactions, and my fear. It reminded me that strength doesn't disappear, it just waits to be reclaimed. Sometimes I still think about that awful night, about how thin that door was, how easily my blind courage could have gotten me killed. And yet, if I'm honest, I know myself. I probably would have charged in anyway. To whoever decided my home was an easy target, you took something away from me that night, my sense of safety. But you didn't take my resolve. And if our paths ever cross again, I promise you I won't be the same person you ran from.
I've spent most of my life looking down a steel throat. My old man worked stations, switches, paperwork, yelling at dumb conductors. I went the other direction. I wanted the cab. I wanted the feeling of 100 cars hooked up behind me, rolling throughout the dark. I hired on in the 90s, when a crew still felt like a crew, 5 guys easy, sometimes more than that. By the early 2000s, they'd whittled us down to 3 on most of the runs. Corporate efficiency, do more with less, automation. These days, crews are just 2 people now, and a whole lot of robotic assistants. That winter run was across Colorado, grain hoppers and tankers, a long snake of freight behind us, pushing empty across the country where the stations are more suggestion than actual reality. You get these stretches out there where it feels like the tracks are the only thing human beings ever built. No houses, no farm lights, just snow hills, the cold, and the endless dark on all sides of you. It was me in the lead unit, my engineer Rick, and a brakeman named Torres riding the second engine. Good dudes. We'd run together enough that the silence between us felt okay, not awkward or even questionable. We knew each other's habits and each other's tells. That stuff kind of matters when something looks wrong. Lets you know if you should react or not. When you work a train with somebody you don't know, you're constantly waiting for them to do something wrong and derail the whole machine. I remember this night in particular very well. The cab heater only half worked and it warmed the other side. The snow blew in loose sheets instead of a full whiteout. The radio would hiss and pop whenever we heard a clear cut and rolled back out into open country. It was cold enough that the rails sang underneath us. If you hung your head out the window, it would literally rattle your teeth. We were 3 hours into the rides when I saw the first drops. I had a paperback open on my knee, one eye on the gauges out of habit. I lifted the binoculars and swept the track ahead of me. Headlights carved a tunnel through the snow. Right there between the rails, something dark crossed the ballast. At first I assumed coyote, some kind of roadkill, something fairly normal. Then we roll over it and I see the red. I leaned toward the glass and took another look. The smear we hit was not oil, it was blood, fresh, dark, and right between the rails. Puddles from something moving down the tracks now. It's all along the snowbanks just off from the train. We keep on rolling and I twist in my seat to watch it pass by, then pick up the radio. "Torres, you catching that trail?" Static, and then his voice came from the rear unit.
"Yeah, looks like blood. A lot of it."
Rick at the controls beside me lets off the throttle a little bit. "Could be a gut-shot deer," he says. "Yeah, maybe," I return back, "but I've never seen one run the ties with its guts falling out." The droplets get bigger, then they stop being droplets at all, just a continuous smear that stains the ballast, cutting a red line across the snowbank. I grab my binoculars again and scan forward. A shape sits off the right side of the right-of-way, cloth heavy, and as we approach, it becomes recognizable. "There's a jacket up ahead," I say. Rick sees it at the same moment. Damn. It's a winter parka thrown open, half buried in the snow. The entire piece of clothing is soaked with more blood. I key the mic. "Dispatch, this is 731. We got a blood trail at least a half a mile long, plus discarded clothing, heavy bleeding, no obstructions to track. Over." Dispatch comes back nice and calm.
"Copy 731. Continue on. Sheriff's office notified. Report additional items as found. Keep an eye on the track."
"Will do." I hang the mic. The cab around me feels tighter now, like the train has shrunk a little bit around me. Then the next items show up. "Right rail," I say. 2 socks, both stained, one torn neatly in half. A few hundred yards later, a balled-up t-shirt drags along the ballast, frozen stiff. It slaps the side of the rail as we pass it. Torres then radios in again.
"You ever see a deer take its clothes off, boss?"
I don't laugh. Eyes open. Look for track obstruction. The blood then continues uninterrupted. Too much for an animal. Too irregular for a dragged body. Someone was moving on foot. I jot the nearest mile marker down and scan again. Another patch of clothes then shows up. Jeans caught on a rock. The legs are knotted together. The thighs are darkened from waist to knee. Rick mutters something about an accident under his breath. "This doesn't match a fall," I say. "If somebody fell off a train, we'd see one single impact. Not all this trailing carnage. They could have been running the right of way, Torres said. People do stupid shit out here. Running and shedding clothes? I ask. In this cold? I lift the binoculars. The lamps then catch something further up ahead. Small, scattered white shapes directly on the ties. Not snow, bandages. Dozens of them. Some rolled, some torn apart, stuck to the rails like they've been dropped in a hurry. Bandages ahead, I say. Track still clear. Copy, Rick says. He straightens up and his hands are firm on the controls. The train continues to hum underneath us. Every 20 or 30 yards, another cloth scrap just appears. A glove, another t-shirt torn and covered with blood. I key up again. Dispatch, additional note, we're seeing medical materials, bandages, gauze, directly on the track itself.
Copy 731. Sheriff's units are en route to Route Station 83. Continue unless obstructed.
The curve ahead rises on the right, a long bend around the low rock formation that we passed 100 times over. I look over and tell Rick, ease it down, let's give ourselves a look. He throttles back another notch, not enough to cause issues with the air in the line, but enough for me to feel the change. The nose dips slightly into that curve. I brace myself, binoculars up. These bandages get thicker, bunched up now in these small piles. Something else is sitting near them, a boot. Just one, sole up. The leather is chewed and stiff. Torres then comes over the radio.
Boss, whatever happened here, they didn't walk away clean. There's gotta be a body out here.
Stay sharp, I respond back. We haven't seen anybody yet. We roll a little further into the curve and then the world shifts. A steep rock face rises to our right. About halfway up its shelf, a natural ledge wide enough for a couple of trucks to park side by side. The snow atop it is disturbed, not melted, not wind patterns, foot traffic. Rick, I say, look right. He does and his hand then freezes on the throttle. There's a man sitting on the ledge. He's leaned up against the rock, legs stretched out, cigarette smoke drifting from his mouth. His coat is gone. His shirt is torn at the sleeves. His left arm is wrapped up in bloody bandages from wrist to elbow. Fresh trails of blood are out from underneath them, bright as paint. He lifts his cigarette like he's greeting us, this casual wave. No panic, no call for help, just a wave. Jesus, Rick says. The train then thunders past him, and I can't look away. The man's face is raw, weathered, streaked with dirt and dried blood. His eyes follow us the whole way around that curve. I grab the radio. Dispatch, we have a live party on the right side ledge at the curve before RS 83. Male injured, appears conscious.
Do you require emergency stop?
I watch the man fade behind us sitting and watching, cigarette ember still glowing. No, I say. Track is clear, continue. We move in open country. The blood trail finally disappears behind us and Torres comes on again.
Boss, did he wave at you?
Yeah, I say back. And Rick doesn't speak for a long time. Nobody does. For a while, none of us say anything. The train settles back into its usual noise, but the cab feels different now, like we were passing through a vacuum. I keep writing notes because it's something that I do. Male on ridge, heavy bleeding, conscious, no distress signal. Friendly? Dispatch calls in again.
713, sheriff's units are arriving at RS 83. Confirm last sighting.
I read the coordinates back to him.
Affirmative. Injured male on the shelf above the curve. Track clear.
Copy. Continue as planned. I hang up and Rick keeps his eyes on the rails, but I can tell his mind is still back at that curve. Torres remains quiet in the second unit. A few miles later, the lines open up into a long prairie. Snow and nothing else. No blood, no clothing, just empty country around us. Torres breaks the silence.
You think he wanted us to see him?
He saw our lights. He could hear us from at least a mile off, I say. Hard to say what his goal actually was. He didn't seem like he needed help though, right? I can't argue. The man on the ridge wasn't panicking. He was waving or maybe trying to flag us down. He looked completely aware, and that's the best word I have for it. Rick finally speaks up. Guy loses that much blood and sits up smoking in that temperature? He needed help and probably didn't even realize it. The police will help him. They have to. I shrug. Yeah, that's the best case. What were we gonna do for him? But even as I say that, I know it doesn't answer anything. We're not doctors. We aren't prepared for a fatally bleeding stranger. We hit our checkpoints, finish the run, and swap crews. Before Torres climbs down, he stops in the doorway and says to me, "Just so I know, he was really there, right?" "Yeah," I tell him. Rick nods and all three of us confirm. Later that morning, dispatch forwards over a short sheriff's report. Blood trail confirmed, clothing collected, medical bandages found, no subject located, search ongoing. And it's the last line that sticks with me. 5 days later, when I'm back on shift, I ask dispatch if any update ever came in. He scrolls and squints at his monitor. Sheriff closed it out," he says. "Said the guy probably moved on before deputies got there. Might have found a road or a ranch house. Happens more often than you think. A lot of vagrants out that way." I thanked him, but that explanation doesn't tell me anything. The man we saw was not wandering or confused. He'd left miles and miles of blood and clothing behind him, patched himself up repeatedly. He'd made it to a high ledge in freezing weather and just sat there waiting for something. Maybe us. Who the hell knows? He acknowledged us, and that was it. No shout, no gesture for help, just a wave like the whole situation was completely normal. It made me think we saw some kind of ghost out from the Old West. And every time I've run that stretch ever since, I look toward that shelf. I never see anybody there, but I still check. It's automatic. My new normal. Whatever the hell happened out there didn't end neatly. Someone survived long enough to leave half themselves along the right-of-way and sit upright watching a freight train pass. And the sheriffs never found him. I was 21 the winter that I almost died. I'd left Phoenix before dawn, cocky and under-caffeinated, driving a 99 Corolla that rattled every time I took it over 60. I was heading east through the high desert, cutting across northern New Mexico toward Texas. Nice, long, empty highways. I'd done that route twice before in the summer, when the worst thing that you had to worry about was a shredded tire or a jackrabbit. The weather app said it was clear, cold with a little light wind. Nothing about the sky closing in on me. Hell, this was the Southwest. Storms and blizzards aren't really our thing out here, so I didn't give it any thought. But by mid-morning, the world around me had gone gray. At first, it was just a haze on the horizon, like some dust coming up. Then the light started to dim. The first flakes hit my windshield, slow, lazy, and pretty actually. I remember thinking, snow, that's different. I turned on my wipers and kept my foot steady on the gas. 10 minutes later, those flakes were the size of quarters. They slapped the glass in wet bursts, smearing any clear vision that I had. My wipers were crap, rubber peeling, leaving these icy streaks. The defroster fought the cold and was easily losing. A film began to creep up on the inside of the glass, so I wiped it with my sleeve, smearing it more in the process. As you can imagine, this was a problem. Now, I should have turned around then. I should have taken the last exit 20 miles back, but I was 21, broke and stubborn, halfway between where I'd been and where I needed to go. I gripped the wheel tighter and told myself to quit being so dramatic. I was already in New Mexico. I couldn't just flip a switch. Next, the wind kind of rose up out of nowhere. It shoved my little car in these hard, unpredictable gusts. Snow rolled across the asphalt in little waves, filling the ruts left by the previous trucks. My tires were bald as cue balls, losing grip every few seconds. Little slips that would jolt my heart right into my throat. "Stay straight," I muttered. "Just stay straight." But the storm continued to thicken up. The horizon now vanished. The sky, the road, and all the fields melted into the same white blur. The world around me shrank into a weak swing of my headlights and the faint shimmer of lane lines already half buried under fresh snow. But I kept driving. Minutes turned into eternity. My hands were aching from gripping the wheel so hard. I dropped my speed to 30, then to 20, then whatever felt slow enough not to die and fast enough not to get stranded. If I got stuck out here, there would be no getting out. There's no other cars, no other headlights, no taillights, just white, falling, swirling, drifting across that asphalt in front of me. The road was not plowed. 2 narrow trenches ran down the middle where trucks had carved their way throughout earlier. On the other side, snow was piling up like walls. Any small drift that I hit tried to drag the Corolla sideways. My bald tires were not going to win any fights. "Come on, don't overcorrect," I whispered to myself. My dad used to say it every winter. "You jerk the wheel, you die." A hard gust then shoved my car. I slid half a lane before I finally caught it, and for a moment, the road vanished completely, swallowed up by that storm. I eased off the gas and steered the car back into the trench. My heart hammering so loud, my chest started to hurt. I barely took a breath, and under my coat, I was beginning to sweat. Time got strange, slow. The heater hummed, but almost did nothing for the interior. The windshield continued to fog, perhaps from my own frantic breathing. I didn't even bother smearing it again. My phone, of course, showed no service. The storm had indeed swallowed everything now. Then I took note of lights, 2 faint blurs in the rear view, growing brighter. Relief shot throughout me. A plow. It had to be, right? I slowed a little more, planning to let it pass so I could just follow its tracks. My shoulders finally loosened up. Then the lights started ripping. I checked my speed, 25. The headlights grew until they flooded the mirror. I flipped it into night mode. It was still very blinding though. Okay, just go around me, what the hell? But instead the lights locked onto me. I couldn't tell exactly how close they were, but my gut said it was only inches. The glare washed out everything. Snow lit up and vanished into the beams, like sparks hitting a furnace. The truck finally swung left. When I saw it through the side window, tall and heavy, plowing through the snow like it wasn't even there. When it reached my window, I turned my head. It wasn't a plow. A lifted white Chevy Silverado, caked in ice and mud, these off-road tires, a bed full of lumber held down with loose ratchet straps. No company markings, no reason to be out here in this storm. The passenger's window was halfway down. His arm rested on the edge of the door, bare and freezing in the wind. A faded tattoo wound across his forearm. Something faded that I couldn't quite make out. I couldn't see the driver, just a silhouette. They both turned and looked at me. Those pale blue eyes locked on me, washed out and empty. Not curiosity or recognition, just this flat stare. We drove side by side for a few seconds, the wind continuing to howl around us. Then he drifted toward me, the passenger smiling like a complete psycho. Not a sudden swerve, more like this slow push. His fender slid closer to my mirror. I eased over to the right, but the shoulder was nothing but deep, uneven mounds of snow. The tire hit one and pulled hard. No, no, no. I corrected left, and he drifted with me. Our lanes became one thin strip of asphalt. His massive truck owned most of it too. The Chevy's side loomed so close that I could see rust along the bottom of the doors. My mirror started to rattle. "Just pass me, please," I said aloud. But he didn't. He eased in again, then backed off like he was testing the boundaries, seeing how close he could get without actually making any contact. The wheel twitched as I hit a patch of ice. I steadied my car again. My mouth was dry as I mulled over my options. Then his engine roared beside me. The Chevy pushed ahead a few feet, then dropped back beside me again. The man did not break eye contact the whole time. He lifted his hand off the door and pointed one finger straight at me. Then he slowly turned his hand sideways and pushed it through the air. "Get off the road." I shook my head without meaning to. No way. The truck drifted over again, closer this time, close enough that I heard the whine of his tires in the snow. My car skidded right. I fought it, kept it on the only strip of pavement that was left, but it kept leaning, and I was running out of road. He dropped back behind me, and for a second I thought maybe this was all over. He'd finally gotten bored, hopefully. Or maybe the storm made him rethink whatever the hell game he was playing with me. But then, that first nudge hit the back of my car, soft, almost gentle, like somebody bumping a foot up against the rear bumper. Then he hit the fucking gas. The Corolla jerked forward, tires slipping. My breath caught as the wheel became useless now in my hands. "Oh, don't do this." Another nudge, harder this time. The truck's headlights filled my mirrors, white, blinding, swallowing the entire back half of the car. Snow whipped between us, horizontal, driven by the storm and our speed, 40, maybe 50. I didn't dare look. I tapped the brakes. The Corolla fishtailed, and behind me the truck surged forward and bumped me again, keeping me going the speed that he wanted me to. I tried the brakes again and smelled smoke immediately. I wasn't driving anymore. I was being pushed. The steering wheel vibrated underneath my palms. Every small turn was meaningless. The car wanted to slide, and the storm wanted to bury me. He wanted whatever he wanted. I still don't know to this day. His engine growled behind me, rising and falling like an oversized heartbeat. Then he began to swing the truck side to side, letting his bumper tap my rear fenders, left, then right, little flicks of force that almost sent me spinning. I fought each and every one, hands locked, breath tight. I'm gonna make it through this. Another tap came, harder. The back of my car slid left and I corrected. He hit the right side. I corrected again, slower this time, because the wheel wasn't answering like it should have been. Tires skimming across hidden ice, road turning into glass underneath me. "Stop!" I screamed. But the next hit was not gentle. It slammed into the left fender and the Corolla just gave up. The back end spun. My world twisted in front of me. Headlights, snow, darkness. Headlights, snow. The tires screamed with every rotation. I tried to steer into the spin, but the car had no grip, no fight, no chance. The ditch then rushed toward me, white, huge, and waiting. I closed my eyes during that final spin out, and my car crashed with this muffled thud. My head snapped forward, the seatbelt locked and crushed my throat. Snow exploded around the car, covering the windows in the thick layer of white. The engine coughed and then suddenly died. And then for a moment after that, everything was silent. The truck roared past me. As it did, I heard a man yell something that I couldn't quite make out, followed by a bottle bursting against the roof, showering the car in a beer that froze before it could even slide down outside the car. He never slowed, he never checked to see if I was alive, just tore off into the whiteout and vanished. I sat there shaking until the adrenaline finally wore off, my phone finally finding this flicker of service. I called 911 and gave them nothing but guesses about where I was. It took an hour for the officers to come and the tow truck to reach me. The cop checked me over, listened to my story, and swept the highway for that Chevy. To my knowledge, they never found it, of course. He said the locals like to drive crazy during these storms, sometimes messing with pass-through traffic. And I guess it's just my lucky day. I hadn't planned on going out there. It was a Friday, work was dead, and my phone was quiet, and I didn't have anybody to answer to that weekend. I looked at my apartment, the laundry piled up in the corner, the same TV show, and I felt like I just kind of needed some air. I couldn't handle another night in the hamster wheel. So I threw my gear in the truck, stove, tent bag, a little hatchet that I kept in the living room, a couple of tarps, cooler full of beer, and gas station grade food. Nothing fancy. I didn't really pack like a responsible adult, just kind of grabbed what I thought I would want and figured everything else would work itself out. You know, the American way. I headed out of town late afternoon, pointed the truck toward the highway. Once you're 20-30 minutes past that last grocery store, it starts to actually feel like you're slipping off the edge of the map. By the time you're 2 hours out, the radio goes to static, and it's just tree line after tree line, cattle fences, dirt road, and the sky. I kept driving. Eventually, I cut off the main road onto this older service road. It wasn't marked and there wasn't any signs, just a pair of ruts that go off through the trees. I've been down plenty of roads like that before on hunting trips and figured I'll just find a pullout and call it good. I wasn't trying to backpack 10 miles in or anything, just wanted to be where nobody else would bother me. But the thing is, I was not alone back there. Once I got deep enough, I started spotting these little pop-up camps tucked off the road. You know the kind, beat up old tents, folding tables, tarps strung between trees, a smoking ring of rocks that may or may not be legal, depending on the time of the year. Weekend people, you see kids on bikes, somebody's dog trotting along off the leash, a guy sitting in a lawn chair drinking beer like he's at a tailgating party. And one of those guys flagged me down. He was older, late 60s, maybe 70s, real sunburned face, what my father called a tackle box skin. Long gray hair, stepped out almost right in front of my truck and lifted up his hand. So I slowed and rolled the window down. "Evening," he said, grinning at me. "You're getting out of here at the perfect time." "Yeah, is that right?" I said. He leaned in a little closer. Sitting there in my truck, I'll admit it was very weird. "You're all clearing out," he said. You want quiet? I'll give you a spot that nobody bothers you. I don't know why I listened to him. Maybe it was his confidence or something else, I don't know. Look, keep on this road, the old timer said. You'll see this cattle gate on the left. It's not locked, just chained. Go through. After that, it gets a little tight, but don't stop. You'll come to a pond. The east side's firm, the west side's soft. Camp on the east side. Nobody'll see you. Then he winked at me. Perfect weekend to be alone. I thanked him, patted my driver's door, and rolled on. The gate was in fact right where he said it was. Rusted, chain loop, but not locked. I unhooked it and drove through and latched it behind me. The trail narrowed to 2 dusty ruts under branches that scraped the sides of my truck. The further I went in, the quieter it seemed to get. No wind, not even birds. Then I saw a small pond reflecting in the trees, dead snags leaning across the water, and beside it was a flat little clearing that looked like it was made for one tent. Somebody had definitely camped there before. Stones in a ring, black with old ash, a few logs dragged into place, hidden off from the road, invisible unless you knew where you were looking. I only glimpsed a flash of it, to be honest. So I parked, hauled in my gear, and set up my camp. There was a nice 20-foot gap between the truck and my tent, as this little gulch kept me from driving in completely. It felt perfect, the kind of quiet that made me want to get drunk by myself. I didn't really waste any time, got a fire going before dark, cracked open a beer and cooked my dinner, hot dogs, chili, and a bag of chips. I hung my Bluetooth speaker from a tree branch, played an old podcast, some kind of true crime show that I downloaded before. The voices sounded oddly comforting out there too, and I told myself I'm only going to have a couple more beers before bed, but time slips when you're the only one awake for miles. By full dark, the fire had burned tall and hot, throwing light high up into the trees. I could see my breath in the cool air, hear the crackle of the logs, and sometimes other noises too. A shuffle, I thought, off in the brush, a snap behind the tent, a faint splash from the pond. Nothing close enough to see, but close enough to notice it. It's the wildlife, I told myself, because it always is, right? I listened to the speaker get louder, laughed at the hosts, and drank one more beer, then another. Around 11, I stumbled into my tent and crashed. Didn't even bother killing the fire or turning off the podcast. Didn't even take off my hoodie. I was asleep in seconds. I awoke, however, to pressure on my sleeping bag. It took me a second to understand that it wasn't just me. Something warm was pressing up against me. Heavy, slow-moving, breathing. My first thought was a deer, then a human. I froze. I was still drunk, but I knew something was wrong. The air smelled awful. Wet rot, mildew, decay. I tried to listen, tried not to move, but my pulse was hammering so loud it kind of drowned everything else out. Whoever it was, they were lying right up against my side, thigh to thigh. I could feel every inhale. I didn't really think, I just kind of rolled hard and yanked the zipper, dove out barefoot into the dirt, and sailed right through the tent flap. The fire was embers now. My flashlight beam jerked across the tree line in the tent fabric. No one followed me out. No sound at all except for my own ragged breathing. Okay, I guess maybe I dreamed it. I was drunk, so I passed out and just imagined the whole thing, but holy shit, it was terrifying. Then I took note of something moving behind the light, a soft step in the dry needles. I froze again. I heard another step and then nothing. I checked the immediate area with my flashlight and found nothing, so I quickly decided it was time to go back to bed. I knew I tied on a pretty good one, drank far more than usual, and fell asleep with my tent unzipped. I figured a skunk or a raccoon had found its way in, following the scent of chili and Fritos onto my hands and breath. It made sense in my late-night drunken stupor. When morning finally broke, the world looked normal again. The birds, the sunlight, the calm pond. I laughed to myself. It really must have been a nightmare. And I went to relight the fire for breakfast and froze. My speaker was now sitting on the table instead of hanging up in the tree. My firewood was now stacked in this strange pattern, sticks laid out in this weird formation like somebody else had been arranging them. In fact, everything was moved around to some degree. In the tree line, I saw him. He stood there motionless, watching me. At first, I thought it was the same man from the road that had told me about this very spot. Same age maybe, but this one looked a lot more feral. His beard was long and matted. His hair was a filthy nest. His clothes were nothing but tied strips of garbage bags and torn rags. His eyes looked vacant, dead gray, and he looked like he hadn't spoken to another person in years. Hey! I called out. He didn't even blink. Sir, are you okay out there? Still nothing. He stepped forward, one jerky movement at a time, arms twitching at his sides. I took a step back. He continued to come closer. It felt like I was watching some kind of zombie from a movie. All right, that's close enough. Just stop right there, I shouted. I still didn't get any kind of reaction though. I quickly snatched up the hatchet from the stump. All right, you come any closer and I swear to God. Still nothing. Just that blank stare as he continued to march straight for me. In that moment, I realized I might actually have to kill this guy. I ran to the truck and grabbed my pistol from the glove box, fired one round into the dirt, and the shot echoed off all the trees. And that got him to stop. He flinched and then spat into the dirt, then turned his back to me and stood there. Stood still, held frozen solid, just facing away like he was waiting for something to happen. I kept the gun on him for what felt like forever. The guy still wasn't moving, not even swaying. That's when I realized there were footprints in the dirt between us. My campsite was now covered in them. Bare feet, long strides, toes dug deep into the dust. He'd been walking around and through my campsite for a while, maybe even all night. This time I didn't wait for him to move again. I kept my gun trained while I backed away toward the camp, tossing my gear into the truck one piece at a time: tent, cooler, sleeping bag. The whole time he stayed right there at the tree line, back to me. When I went to go grab my pack from the tent, a smell hit me again, that damp chemical human smell. The inside was telling. My blanket pushed aside, sleeping bag twisted, dirt smeared across the floor like something had crawled in it. The clothing and fabric on the tent floor was covered in dark stains, clearly human-shaped, and there was handprints on the side of my sleeping bag. I nearly threw up at the sight. That's what I felt last night. This psycho crawled into my tent and spooned me. I slammed the tailgate shut and got behind the wheel. The old man still hadn't moved. I started the engine, half expecting him to turn around, but he didn't. Stayed there, motionless, that tangle of black plastic rustling in the morning breeze. As I drove off, I caught one last look in the mirror. He was crouching now, really low to the ground, picking through the dirt where I'd been standing. I couldn't even see what he was doing, gathering up things maybe, small bits that I'd left behind, but it looked very, very important to him for some reason. When I reached the main road, I chained the gate behind me and didn't even look back. A ranger told me that there were all kinds of bizarre reports from out there. The land had been part of some kind of condemned federal property. Old mine shafts, chemical dumpings, toxic runoffs. Nobody should have been out there at all. He said the locals call it the basin. He also told me a few people still lived out there, if you call it that. And charming that I got to meet one of them. By August, the Lowveld had gone pretty silent. The grass was brittle and the air was full of dust, and the water holes had shrunk into muddy pits ringed with bones. This was the season when everything starved. Hyenas were thin, giraffes would stick to the deep plains. Even the vultures stayed grounded, conserving what little they had left. I'd been guiding safaris for more than a decade now, but I've never seen the bush this desperate. Predators had started turning on livestock, and the villagers were really scared. 2 weeks ago, a herdsman was taken near the riverbed. The radio chatter was constant. Missing goats, missing dogs, missing people. The prides were moving closer to the roads, shadowing vehicles, pacing the horizons. They are notoriously lazy hunters, so when things get hard, they'll kill pretty much anything they can find. It's a harsh reality of being in the desert. That morning, my partner Rory and I had drove out ahead of the client tour, scouting the route toward the dry pans. We didn't speak much. A few miles out, we saw them again. 9 lions, strung along the ridge, not resting in the grass like they should have been, but following along. They'd been doing it for days now. Unsettling, but nothing we hadn't seen before. "They're tracking us," Rory said, glassing up the slope. I nodded. They're tracking something, but it might not be us. We reached the camp by sunset. No clients tonight, no other guided camps, just us and whatever lurked beyond the firelight. The air dropped fast, hitting the mid-40s by midnight. Somewhere far off, a lion roared, and another answered from the opposite direction. I told Rory to keep his rifle near and his bladder in check. Didn't need any goofy accidents. The tracks that we'd seen at dusk were very fresh. A big male's paw prints led straight toward camp before veering off into the scrub. They were here and didn't care who knew it. That night before turning in, I remember saying, if they're out there, they'll keep to the high grounds. Boy, was I wrong. I woke to pressure on my spine, hot, rhythmic, alive. Not weight like a person, but mass, breathing, and I froze. The canvas behind me had flexed with each exhale, heat radiating through my thermal. Something rumbled through the fabric, deep and steady, like a Mac engine. It took a second to understand what in fact I was feeling. Then my blood turned to ice. There was a lion laying against my tent. I could even feel the purr vibrating through my ribs. The air was smelling some kind of awful, musky and sweet and coppery, like meat left in the sun. I didn't dare move. Eli, Rory whispered from his tent, voice cracked and shaking. You awake? I wanted to kill him for speaking, and for a moment, I felt its claw extend from the pad and into my back and hips. At that moment, I felt like a bit of food at the end of a fork. The lion's breathing then hitched and the weight shifted. The canvas groaned as it rose up, brushing my back and towering. The tent poles creaked, dirt popping beneath the stakes. I didn't need to see it to know. He was standing right there, paws level with my head, only a thin sheet of fabric between us now. My entire body tensed into a knot. My rifle sat 3 feet away. Might as well have been across the continent. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. There were others out there. The lion sniffed, long wet inhalations that pulled air straight out of the tent. His breath rolled through the seams, hot and rank. Then came the scrape of claws, fine faint curls across the ground just beyond my hip. It was marking. I heard the sound of teeth grinding, this low groan. Rory, I whispered. Almost no sound at all. I don't really know what compelled me to speak. Subconsciously, I think I was trying to speak my final words, maybe. Help me. Ask and you shall receive. His tent zipper began to descend and a lion's growl flattened everything outside. Everything went primal after that. Snarls erupted between us, different pitches overlapping. The pride was answering the male. I heard one sprint past my tent, heavy paws tail whipping the canvas. Another hit something metal with a clang. In the morning, we'd see it was the truck. Rory screamed, but it cut off after a second, realized just how fatal the situation was. Any amount of attention could be death. My heart pounded so hard that it shook my teeth. I could feel the ground vibrating with their movement. One lion roared close enough that it brought tears to my eyes. The sound wasn't volume, it was pressure. My eardrums flexed before it. The tent even seemed to breathe with it, bowing in and then out. It really felt like a movie. Everything told me that I was about to die. Another lion came by, female by the lighter steps, charged through the far side of the camp. I heard her slam against the cooler, the lid popping open, tin cans and plastic scattering around. Then this screeching tear as the claws raked the bin around the campsite. Rory made the mistake of flicking on his headlamp. The beam cut through the wall of my tent, bright white and trembling, and in that slice of light, I saw its shadow, the male's head. It was massive and round, the muzzle pushing the canvas inward. Every whisker impression was visible. His jaws were open, and I saw the silhouette of his teeth now cutting across the fabric, inches from my face. I swear you could see steam rising up from where his breath hit. I stopped breathing entirely. My chest ached in this bad way, eyes still watering. My heartbeat now became the only thing I could hear. He huffed again, this deep, irritated gust that flapped open the canvas against my cheek. Then, out in the dark, a lioness gave this short, sharp grunt, and they all sprang into motion. The male snarled annoyed, tail thudding the ground, then stepped back. The heat peeled away from the tent wall and the outline then vanished. He turned his body, brushing up against the entire length of the canvas as he passed it, his mane rasping like sandpaper. I heard the thud of each paw as he walked towards Rory's tent. "Don't move, man," I whispered. His light went dark, and the only sound the lions were making now was them pacing around us, breathing and tails whipping up against the dust, at least 4 of them, maybe more. The male then froze again, and he made this sound, a deep, chesty snort, and the others went quiet instantly. I pictured them all crouched, eyes reflecting the starlight, paws kneading through my skin, teeth, claws, my blood soaking into the sand. As soon as it started, they just kind of moved off. It wasn't in a panic, just this sudden burst of controlled energy. After a few seconds, we couldn't even hear them anymore. The silence they left behind was worse than the noise. My whole body was now soaked in sweat, freezing against the night. What the hell just happened? After a long time, I heard Rory whisper to me, "You alive?" "Yeah," I croaked. "You?" "I think so." We stayed awake until the sky started to lighten up, rifles in reach, listening for a return that never came. By sunrise, the camp looked like it had survived some kind of storm. The fire pit was scattered with paw prints, lapping in every single direction. The cooler lay tipped on its side, lid torn off, edges shredded. My tent sagged from where that lion had leaned on it, canvas slick with dew and greasy film of some kind. I stepped outside and felt the cold air hit my face. It was quite sobering. The horizon glowed pale and gold. It felt like a victory. Rory then came out after me, eyes hollow. Neither of us spoke. The prints were everywhere, some bigger than dinner plates, deep enough to hold shadows. You could see where the male had roamed, where the ladies had prowled, and where another had been pacing Rory's tent. It wasn't a visit, it was some kind of inspection. "They could have easily taken us," he muttered. I nodded, no need for another comment. The radio crackled in the dirt below the table crate, hissing static. I turned the dial with numb fingers until a voice cut through, urgent and breathless, full of noise.
Repeat, 1 confirmed fatality in Sec 1 village. Male adult, attacked during the night.
Rory and I locked eyes. The radio kept talking.
Livestock pen destroyed, 2 goats taken. Tracks indicate a pride, at least 6 strong, moving southwest.
Southwest, away from us. I lowered the radio, the bush went quiet again, but it felt more alive, like anything could step out of that high grass. "They were hunting," Rory said to me. "Consider yourself lucky." He frowned, nodding. I looked out across the open plain, and from where we stood, you could see the ridgeline, faint tracks etching into the dust. On the other side was a town where a man had now died, a place where we took our safaris for supplies on a regular basis. For whatever reason that night, the lions didn't kill us, and I accepted that without question. What else could I really do? The plains are super unforgiving out here. Survival is moving on from victories, because almost all of them are temporary. I'm an old woman now, retired, nice, quiet life. I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, especially the true crime ones. Some nights I hear stories that sound awfully familiar, and here's one you might have never heard before. This happened in the mid-1980s when I was barely 20 years old. I went to a community college in the Midwest, boring, flat, windy, accented with brick buildings. I was out of town, so I lived in the dorms for convenience and to try to save some money. There were 6 of us total inside one unit. We each had a small private bedroom, but we shared this nice long common room and one bathroom. The walls there were thin, cheap carpet accompanied them, and you could hear everything: music, phone calls, people crying, or, well, doing other things. Marcy was loud all the time, even when she was asleep. Donna never left the dorm, only studied. Tish liked attention, if you know what I mean. And Kelly liked horror movies and wore a lot of black. Sharon talked to her parents on the phone every Friday for at least a couple of hours. And then you get to me. I got good grades, had a part-time job, and mostly just kept to myself. Although I did like the occasional party or concert. We had a lot more school in front of us, and since we all got along, we elected to board together again the following semester for a few months, then it was goodbye. That summer, when students were mostly gone, a girl was found half dead just off campus inside an alley. I didn't know her, and I don't think any of us did. The news said that her injuries were bad enough the police thought that she might have been hit by a car and then dragged into the alley itself, an accident that had turned ugly. People talked about it where I lived for a few days, at the diner, on the radio. Then it kind of just faded into background noise. The police didn't say much, and without any more details, it was easy to think it was just kind of random. By the time the fall semester had started, we all moved back into the dorm, and the alley was a place people continued to avoid at night. But the second girl was found 3 weeks into that fall semester. This time, no one tried to offer any kind of reasons. It was the same part of town, but a different alley. The police still didn't release any more details, but everybody could already see the pattern forming. The campus changed almost overnight. More patrol cars, warning flyers taped up to doors, a meeting in the dorm where the director told us not to walk alone at night and to trust our instincts. But we didn't even know what we were looking for. And of course, we were already afraid. So we start pairing up. Late night classes demanded us to stick together. Trips to the store became group outings now. The bars near campus emptied out earlier than usual. Men we didn't recognize stood out like glowing red flags. Not long after, the third girl was found, and we realized exactly how powerless we truly were. Nothing anyone did or was doing was saving them. After that, the police stopped hedging. They weren't issuing graphic warnings. Curfews were fully enforced. They said they believed the killer was a local, a man acting alone, likely in his 30s or 40s, and very familiar with the area itself. Of course, again, that description didn't really narrow anything down, and it made everybody look suspicious. But because of the sudden information dump, the murders actually stopped for a while. Weeks would pass, nothing new. No arrests, no new bodies. That silence was haunting. People relaxed just enough to function, but still nobody felt safe. We kept our door locked at all times, and lights stayed on at night. Hell, Kelly even stopped watching horror movies. We didn't say it out loud, but we all believed the same thing. He's still out there, lurking at the edges of our vision, waiting to jump on the most vulnerable person he could find. That weekend, a girl from another dorm ended up filing a police report. She said a man followed her home from a bar. He stayed behind her the entire walk, never spoke, but was aggressive in his pursuit. Thinking this was the killer, she wasted no time acting. When she cut through the alley, he followed. When she ran, he ran. This alley normally turned into a dead end, but to this woman's fortune, a business had its back door open for a routine cleaning. She slipped into the open business just before the man reached her. But of course, by the time the police arrived, the man was gone. That story moved around like a bad rumor. This girl lived. She could describe him. Tall, dark jacket, work boots, ordinary, but seemed beyond fury. Sunday night, I think around 11, all 6 of us were inside the common room, studying, folding laundry, just trying to keep busy. Outside, the campus was quiet, being patrolled by the police. Then somebody knocked on our door. 1, 2, 3 times. Everybody froze. Marcy leaned toward the people and looked, and her breath hitched. It's a cop. I looked next. The man was in uniform, but something about it felt off. I didn't recognize the insignia on the patch. Open the door, he said. There's a situation nearby. I need to check your unit. Donna shook her head, eyes bugging out of her head. Sharon whispered, This can't be real. Kelly didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone and dialed 911. We're calling the cops. His voice changed instantly, screaming through the walls. He started banging on the door, and then he ran off. As his footsteps disappeared, we heard a clatter of something on the floor. We all kind of huddled together inside the common area, dispatch on the phone, waiting for somebody to come get us. Police would arrive within minutes. Lights washed everything away, including our worries. Real officers then ran past our door, and they caught him across the street, trying to disappear into the parking lot. His costume ended up being his downfall. Later, we learned that noise that we'd heard was a hammer and a 10-inch screwdriver, items that he'd used in his previous murders. and I was in total shock when we were told that. I had almost opened up the door for him. They moved us out that night, and police took all of our statements. Our parents called, and Sharon's were on campus by the morning. Classes weren't stopped. Just another normal day after the fact. The man's name was released later along with a photo, and I didn't recognize him. None of us did. If you Google enough, I'm sure you can find him. I finished the semester and left town not long after. The dorms remained open. New students moved in and slept in those same beds that we were almost murdered in. I've been crossing Texas pretty much all day, cutting through the stretch of backcountry highway where the land flattens out, doesn't really ever stand back up. No other towns, no exits, just road, scrub, and butt-ugly country. You could see 10 or 15 miles straight ahead without a single bend. And then out of nowhere, my car started jerking. A hard pull to the right, steering going loose for a second, my dashboard lighting up. I eased off the gas and then coasted to the shoulder. By the time I stopped, the tire was completely gone, flapping rubber against the asphalt. I stepped out and felt that heat roll up off the road that was very unforgiving. The tire was shredded down to the rim, but worse than that, there was fluid coming out from beneath my car. Anxiety quickly came to life inside of me. I popped the hood and immediately backed off. Steam hissed up at me in these short bursts. The smell was that of cooking oil. I let the air out and grabbed my phone. No signal, of course. I walked up the shoulder, then back the other way, holding up my phone just out of habit. I'm not even sure that works anymore. Still nothing. I looked down at the highway in both directions. Empty. Nothing was looking good for me in the moment. I checked the trunk. No spare, which made me furious. Just a jack, a tire iron, and a bag of stuff that I did not need right now. The engine was ticking close by as it cooled off, and somewhere out in the brush, insects were clicking in these eerie bursts, cicadas or whatever the hell they're called. The sun was dropping, taking the heat with it, but leaving everything out in this washed out light. I sat on the guardrail and took stock. I had some water, a couple of protein bars, and a jacket, enough to get me through the night if I had to. And that's when it all really hit me. I wasn't going to get help anytime soon, and if somebody did come along, it would be the only car I'd probably see for hours. I looked down the road in front of me and tried to not trip out. I stayed with the car because there wasn't anywhere else really to go. I'm in the middle of nowhere. The heat started to bleed out of the ground once the sun was dropping. The sky went dark, and every few minutes I waved my phone light down the highway, more out of habit than hope. I really, genuinely have never felt alone like that. Then in the distance I heard an engine, loud, rough, and struggling. No muffler. It was sounding like a chariot from heaven in my ears in the moment, though. Headlights then appeared far off, growing faster. I could see it in the fading sunlight. It was a black van, lifted, riding on thick off-road tires. The windshield was dark enough that I couldn't even see the driver at all. I stepped close to the shoulder and waved my light. The van slowed once it was actually within range of me. Salvation. I found a spot on the shoulder just behind my car. The engine stayed running, and after a beat, the driver's door opened and a guy hopped down. He seemed to be in his mid-20s, thin and wired. Sunglasses still on, even in the near dark. A bandana loose around his neck, cigarette burning in his hand. He looked around with a smile. Hell of a place to get stuck, huh? Yeah, I said. I blew a tire, no service. Just my luck. He chuckled, then turned into a slow circle, taking in the road, the brush, the dark. No service, huh? He said again. That's real bad luck. This started to sound like a catchphrase at this point. Well, good thing I came along, he added. Let's see what you did. He crouched by the wheel, pulled out a flashlight that was unbearably bright. The beam snapped on and brought shadows to life all around us, and he whistled. Whew, you picked up a big knuckle of metal. He then angled the flashlight. A long, jagged strip of steel was wedged into the wheel well, bent and chewed up to hell. That'll stop any rig. I glanced over at him. You think that came off something? He shrugged at me. Out here, it could be anything. Maybe it bounced off a trailer that had just been tumbling down the highway. He helped me jack the car up. His van's headlights flooded the scene, washing everything else out past the shoulder, and the highway behind us quickly vanished into complete blackness. We played with the lugs for a while. He tugged on the ruined tire with a grunt. Something's catching in the back. The lugs are clear, so I don't know what it is. I can't see it. What do you need? I asked him, and he looked over at me for a second, and I mean really looked, then smiled. Oh, I'm gonna need you under there, he said. Just tell me what's hanging it up. I hesitated. The jack creaked slightly under the weight of the car. It's just for a second, he said. I'll be right here. I didn't want to crawl under my car at night with a stranger standing over me, but I wanted to be off that road more than anything else. I just had to press myself against it for just a second. All right, I said. Let me use your flashlight. He lifted it slightly. This one? I'll angle it around. I'll hold it for you. I nodded back. So I got on my back and slid under the car. The ground around me was cold and smelled like burnt oil. I squinted, trying to make sense of all the shapes in the dark, and there was nothing out of place to my eye, at least. I still can't see much, I said to him. Can you angle that flashlight a little better? This one? Then the light exploded, white hot. It almost made me nauseous. My body locked up, every muscle clenched, my jaw snapped shut so hard I thought I broke my teeth. God knows how many thousands of lumens cold clocked me out of nowhere and sent me into this lizard brain mode. It was like he tasered my eyes. And somewhere above me, the metal shifted and the car rocked. Panic then shot through me. I twisted and rolled, pulling myself sideways as the car tipped. And then it slammed down right where I'd been. The jack snapping loose, the frame smashing into the asphalt. I watched my exposed frame leave a dent half an inch deep. I scrambled backward. What the fuck just happened? The guy shoved the car again, trying to roll it further. Was this his plan all along? When he saw me upright, his face went flat. Hey, he said quickly. Easy, that was an accident. But I ran. I bolted straight off the shoulder into the desert, crashing through the brush and loose rock. Hey, you okay? It was an accident. I dropped behind a low rise and just stayed there, crouched, watching through the brush. I knew I was safe out here in the dark, at least for the moment. He paced along the road with the flashlight, sweeping the beam back and forth, breathing hard, nervous. He kept talking, saying accident over and over again, like he's trying to convince some kind of lawyer in front of him. I'm not moving. I'm not going to let this asshole have any satisfaction whatsoever. After a while, he just stopped. I heard a door slam. Then the van's engine revved up. Headlights swung across the shoulder once, looped, then disappeared. I stayed hidden long enough for that sound to fade, waiting for silence to swallow everything up in the world. I stayed in the brush for a couple of hours. I couldn't trust that he was really gone. When I walked back to the car, the road was now empty. No headlights, no engine noise, just my car that still was wounded on the shoulder. I got inside, locked the doors, and just waited. I didn't turn anything on. I just watched the road and listened, ready to run again if I needed to. I figured I'd be able to hear him just like before. But he didn't come back. Morning came and I was in disbelief. The desert was normal, and a patrol car pulled over a little after sunrise. The trooper took one look at my car and nodded. Let me guess, you had a real bad night. I told him what happened, kept it simple. Flat tire, van, guy with the flashlight. The more I thought about it, the more I think he actually hit me with the stun gun after he flashed me. Then the car coming off the jack. When I described the van, he stopped riding and stepped away to make a call. You're not the first person to mention that vehicle to me. A tow truck came, and while they loaded up the car, the trooper walked around the shoulder, found the piece of metal from the wheel well, bagged it, and took a few photos. And that evening, he gave me a call. They picked the guy up outside a small town of where I broke down. Same van, same setup. Inside, they found equipment that matched everything that I ascribed to them, along with evidence tying him to several roadside deaths over the last few years. Breakdown after breakdown that oddly resulted in these bizarre and mysterious deaths over the past few years that remained a mystery. The trooper didn't go into more details because the investigation was ongoing. I travel much differently now, almost being killed in the middle of nowhere turned out to be far more nightmarish than I ever would have expected, and being left and crushed slowly to death by my own car to boot. To hell with all that. I stay strapped and keep a spare tire. I don't take bullshit back roads, and if I do, I've got a map and a line directly to civilization. Fool me once. When I was in 5th grade, not much happened where I lived at. It was considered a retirement community, with the same houses, the same kids, the same routine. The river ran behind our neighborhood, it was dirty and brown, and none of us really gave it a second thought. Just like that stream, we lived inside this boring place. But that all changed in the spring that year when somebody found a suitcase inside the water. At first, it was just normal small town talk. Kids whispering on the bus. Somebody said a fisherman hooked it and then dragged it in. Somebody else said a dog pulled it up on the bank. And by the time we got home that afternoon, my mom was on the phone. Her voice was tense and she was staring out the kitchen window. My dad didn't turn on the TV when he got home, which was unusual. He sat at the table, told us straight up that the police had pulled a body from the river. In a suitcase, he said, and it all clicked together. And that's the part that stuck with me more than anything else. A suitcase was something you took on vacation, something with wheels and a handle, not something you put a person inside. How the hell could somebody even fit in there? The details would come out at school. Somebody had chopped her up and fit her inside like a puzzle piece. Nobody had any clue who she was. Adults said that she was probably a prostitute, and that word floated around school for a few weeks, half the kids not even knowing what it meant, just that it sounded bad. She wasn't identified, at least not that I ever heard, and nobody talked about any kind of suspect. The police taped off the river path and investigated for weeks on end. Parents didn't let their kids wander around anymore. My mom took to locking all the doors every second of the day, and my dad walked the yard with a flashlight after dark. For the first time, the idea settled in that somebody had done this and then just gone home, that they possibly lived somewhere nearby, maybe close enough to hear us laughing in the street or see lights on at night, to know our names and our schedules. And that's when the river started feeling like a part of the neighborhood and more like an omen. Nobody went down there anymore. And by the end of that summer, 2 more bodies had turned up. Both women, both cut apart in the same way. One in another suitcase, the other stuffed into a duffel bag. Police still weren't saying much, but they didn't have to. Everybody knew it was the same guy. They were keeping all of the more intimate details until they were closer to some kind of breakthrough. After all this, our parents may as well have been law enforcement too. They hovered over everything. No more riding bikes past sundown. No more cutting through the woods to save any kind of time. If you were outside, somebody's dad was watching from a porch or a garage, usually holding a golf club or a baseball bat. We adjusted because kids always do. There were 4 of us total, me, Aaron, Kyle, and Ben. And we spent most afternoons holed up at Aaron's house because his parents worked late. We set up camp in his bedroom on the 2nd floor, the one with the view of the river path and the tree line beyond it. Aaron had binoculars. His uncle had used them for hunting. We took turns looking at them like snipers inside an eagle's nest. And we watched everything. People walking dogs, joggers, old couples shuffling past with grocery bags. Every stranger that went by would get studied by us. Every parked car was scrutinized. We were half scared and half bored, which is a whirlwind combination at 11 years old. Could be anybody, Kyle kept saying. That's how they do it. Yeah, they always live close by, Ben added. Fuel on the fire. And we all believed that. The killer wasn't some shadow creature drifting in from the highway. He was a local. He bought gas. He waved at his neighbors. He knew where the river had enough power to move some kind of big, heavy suitcase like that. And when the news broke about a fort discovery, things tipped from fear into grand paranoia. Police swarmed the river once again, farther downstream this time. Helicopters thudded overhead for quite some time. The rumor was another body had come floating through. But this time it wasn't a body, just blood, this unbelievable amount of it, and nobody knew what to make of it. Now the river was closed off completely, and parents warned us time and time again to not go anywhere near it under any circumstances, which meant obviously that we started talking about going. As mentioned, kids are dumb as hell, and especially when something appears scary. We planned it like complete idiots. Midnight, flashlights with fresh batteries stick together, No screaming unless somebody was actually being attacked. Aaron even brought this cheap disposable camera, like we might make some kind of major breakthrough or something. We met at the edge of a taped off trail, hearts pounding, nervous as hell, trying to come off as brave and pull together. Crawling under the tape felt crazy, as if we just crossed into some kind of afterlife. The woods around the river were swallowing everything up, and our flashlights carved out these narrow tunnels, catching branches, rocks, but nothing alive. Nobody said a word, and every snap of a twig made each one of us flinch. And at first, we found nothing. No tools, no stains, no signs of anybody ever camping or dumping anything. Just dirt, bugs, and the steady rush of water, getting louder and louder as we got closer. When we finally reached the riverbank, nobody still was saying anything for quite some time. We just kind of stood there, listening, expecting what? I don't know, a scream, a splash, anything to confirm the knots in our bellies, but nothing presented itself. Aaron finally pointed downstream. The bridge. It was old, concrete, barely wide enough for two cars to pass by on. We weren't supposed to be anywhere near it at night, and the idea of getting closer made my stomach do a backflip, but nobody wanted to say no. Nobody wanted to be the scaredy cat. Halfway there, we saw lights. There was this RV sat upon the bridge, engine running, headlights on, brake lights glowing red, but it wasn't moving. The passenger door hung open, and somebody inside shifted, metal clinking slowly. None of us spoke. We crouched instinctively. Being seen could mean death. "The hell's he doing?" Ben whispered. And an answer came a second later. Something heavy tipped over the railing. It teetered, caught for a second, then slid and plummeted into the water with a deep, wide splash. It was a suitcase. I knew it before my brain caught up. The blocky shape, the way it fell as one unit. The man leaning over the railing looked down at his handiwork. His face was in shadow, but I could see his hand moving, rubbing at the front of his jeans. My legs locked. I couldn't breathe. He climbed back into the driver's seat, shut the door, released the brake, and the RV rolled forward, tires purring softly, disappearing off into the woods. Nobody moved until that sound was completely gone. And then we ran until we hit the edge of the neighborhood. Aaron starts yelling, then screaming, and somebody else was in tears behind me. Porch lights came on. A man stepped out in socks and asked what the hell was wrong with us. We tried to explain to him the RV, the bridge, the suitcase, and that word did it. Parents came out after that, and my dad told my mom to call the police. I think everybody was making that call. My dad took off down the street toward the river with two other parents behind him, half dressed and pissed off. Squad cars arrived just a few minutes later, red and blue lights painting everything in sight. The police separated us and took statements, and we told the same story over and over again. An old RV, yellow headlights, suitcase over the railing. The cop writing things down did not interrupt, just let our story flow. They found the suitcase within 15 minutes because it hadn't gone far. The river by the bridge was slow moving, filled with branches and deadfall. One of the officers pulled the zipper back, just enough to peek inside, then closed it again, and everybody knew what was in there. Nobody let us near it. The search started immediately. They put out a description for the RV, older model, light colored, possibly rusted out. Roadblocks went up on the highway. Patrols ran all night long, and by morning, there was nothing. No RV, no suspects, no answers. The school was closed next day too. The river was essentially condemned to the public. Nobody complained about being bored. I never left my window. My dad's binoculars glued to my face now. It felt dumb to me to stop looking for him. Shit, we were the only ones to actually see him, to have some semblance of an idea of what we were looking for. And I watched every street as much as I possibly could. And then I saw an old RV rolling through a few streets over, just kind of drifting. It never stopped cruising, just passed through, almost as if it were lost. The windows were too dark to see an actual driver. I yelled for my parents, but by the time they came upstairs, it was of course gone. They called 911 anyway. The police came back, took another report, and asked if I was sure. Yeah, I'm sure. They took my statement and resumed the hunt. No one was ever arrested, at least to my knowledge. The killings stopped, at least in our area, and eventually the river opened back up. Kids started fishing out there again. Life went on. But there for a year or two, we were all convinced he'd come back, slit our throats in our sleep for seeing what he'd done.
This story is from my hike from Graz, Austria to Venice, Italy. It might not be as frightening as some other stories, but I want to share it. In the summer of 2023, my two friends and I, all 17 years old at the time, were in the final week of our hike from Graz to Venice. It was late at night, and we still hadn't found a place to set up our tents. We were walking along a seemingly endless beach, exhaustion weighing heavily on us after 20 days of walking. Our legs ached from blisters, and we had already taken minutes-long pauses to regain energy. We were all eager to rest. Eventually, we found a suitable spot on the map, a beach further away from the city we were in, and decided to head there. By this time, we had briefly entered the city but hadn't gone deep into it. The streets were empty except for some tourists near the beach. I was so exhausted that I was even walking with my eyes closed. To reach our campsite, we had to take a small gravel path connected to one of the streets. As we arrived at the intersection that led to our intended campsite, a man suddenly emerged from the path we needed to take, which led right into the woods, and walked right past us. My friend, distracted by fatigue, walked past the intersection without noticing it. I quickly called out to him, pointing out that we needed to take that path. Just after I corrected my friend, I don't know why, but I glanced back and noticed the man standing in the middle of the road, motionless, staring at us. For a few seconds I looked at him, but it was pitch black, so I couldn't make out his features. I didn't think much of it and decided to continue walking. However, as soon as we entered the gravel path, we made a chilling discovery. The man was now following us, heading back from where he had just come. As we began to worry, all our exhaustion and pain vanished, along with the weight of our fully packed backpacks. While still walking down this dark path, we started discussing what to do rather loudly, not expecting him to understand our language since we weren't locals. After a brief discussion, we decided that jumping into the field next to the path was a better option than staying on the path or facing the man. So, after about 30 meters of walking along the path, we jumped into the field. The field was full of crops and difficult to wade through, including jumping over some kind of ditch in the middle of the field. But with adrenaline pumping, we barely noticed the discomfort and kept running as fast as we could with these huge backpacks. As soon as the man saw us move, he immediately turned back and returned to the road that we had just left. We quickly did the same, and with a head start, we managed to put some distance between us and him. Our shorts and shoes were wet. However, there was no time to care. The man was still following us. We rushed through the streets of the city, and as soon as we didn't see him anymore, we calmed down a bit. Still, fear kept us moving, trying to stay in the darkness so he couldn't see us. Walking past a gas station at the end of the city, which could be seen from the street where we had met the man, we continued and walked another 5 kilometers before finally setting up our tents, far away from where we had encountered the man. To this day, we have no idea if he was just a drunkard playing a twisted joke, or if he had more sinister intentions. And who knows what might have happened if it hadn't been for those pauses that we took. We might have been right on time to meet this mysterious man further down into the darkness of the woods. I can't breathe. My eyes are open, and I am able to see everything around me. Yes, it's shrouded in darkness, but it's still my room, and I am still in my bed. Except I can't move, and I can't breathe. I can feel the eyes of something sinister on me. Something is watching me from the darkness that is surrounding me. I don't see it. I can smell it. A putrid, stagnant smell, like sulfur, acid and bowel movement all in one. But I feel it. I feel anger and the hatred in the air around me. The room I fell asleep in was peaceful. It's my room. I can see the Jack Skellington tapestry on the wall across from me. The television is in sleep mode. The little bubbles dancing around the screen. I can feel the weight of my tiny dog beside me under the blanket. My drawings hung where they were when I fell asleep, but the darkness in the room is darker. The feeling in the room is evil. There's a sound. What's that sound? It's not me. I can't breathe, I can't move, and I for sure can't speak. But something is moving. Footsteps. Those are footsteps that I can hear, coming from my closet. I cut my eyes, looking as far to the side of them to try and see who or what. But there's nothing there. Until there's movement at the end of my bed. Looking down, still unable to do anything but stare. There he is, the guy in the top hat. He's tall, all black. He's not a he at all, but a thing. No facial features are eminent, but I can make out a grin spreading across his blank and stoic face. He's enjoying this. The torture and pure terror I feel. I can tell he's feeding off of it. Tightly shutting my eyes, I'm hoping that doing this will make him go away. My eyes fly back open in a panic when I feel breath on my face and neck. There he is, hovering over me, the grin wider than it was before. I tried to make him disappear. He's mouthing something, but no words are audible. And then in a growling whisper, "I watch you sleep at night. So lovely you are. From this night forward until time ends, I will watch you sleep. Time and time again." Praying in my head that he will just go away, I can feel the tears gliding down the sides of my face. I still can't breathe, move, or speak. I am so beyond trapped, and the terror welling inside me needs to be released. I open my mouth, forming a scream, and in my mind, that's all I'm doing, screaming as loud as possible. Finally, the only thing filling the silence and the darkness that surrounds me are my screams. I sit up as quickly as possible and gather myself. Inhale. 1, 2, 3. Exhale. 1, 2, 3. After I had pulled myself together and obtained the courage to go to the bathroom, I head that way. Upon returning to my bed, I grab my phone to check the time, and there, present on the screen, is a picture taken of me from above. My eyes wide and filled with tears that are streaming down my cheeks, mouth open in the form of a scream, and a dark glaze over my eyes. Those don't look like my eyes. I work at a restaurant in a small town, and I have been locking up at the end of the night for a year now. It's nice, easy money, and I usually get paid an extra hour while doing simple tasks like cleaning or rolling silverware. It's actually calming after a hectic night in the kitchen. I never check bathrooms or anything before locking up. Usually the restaurant is empty well before I am finished, and I have a lot of time to myself. There is something so eerie about being in a restaurant alone after closing. What was once a bustling place full of people is now empty and silent. The sounds of the machinery kicking on can be heard across the restaurant. The sound of the ice machine dumping ice usually makes me jump. With the layout of the restaurant, the main light switches are on the opposite side of the restaurant from the door with the alarm. So I usually lock the back and front doors and then turn off all the lights. Then I make my way through the dark restaurant to the side door, which has the keypad. In order to arm the system, all doors need to be closed and there needs to be no movement in the restaurant. If there is an error, it will tell me the door that is open, or infrared, and the area where there is movement. When I first started locking up, I needed the flashlight on my phone to navigate to the door. But now I know the layout, so I just walk in the darkness. For some reason, it is less scary to just speed walk through the dark than to have a dimly lit phone light casting shadows and reflecting off surfaces. I hate to say it as a grown man. The dark creeps me out. Tonight, the restaurant had been closed for almost 2 hours. I mopped the kitchen, cleaned a bit, and rolled some silverware for the morning crew. I locked the doors, turned off the lights, then made my way through the dark restaurant to the door. I typed in the code and got an error. Error, infrared detected. Dining room. I felt my stomach sink. I know I've been alone in this restaurant for 2 hours. I know I had just walked through that pitch-black dining room. Just then I heard footsteps pounding on the tile coming towards me from the dining room. I have gotten chills down my spine before when something creeps me out. But this was different. It felt like my entire nervous system was overloaded. I didn't even turn around, I just opened the door and bolted out into the parking lot. I didn't hear any footsteps behind me. I got in my car and peeled out. I drove down the street and called 911, and then my boss. I waited until they arrived before I went back into the restaurant. The door was wide open. There was no sign of anyone. Nothing was stolen, nothing was broken. I gave a report of what happened, and that was it. The only interior camera that is pointed at the cash registers didn't see into a majority of the dining room, but the exterior camera caught something that scared the life out of me, and that I will think about for the rest of my life. It captures me running out of the building and around the corner to my car. Shortly after I exited, you could barely see the elongated shadow of someone standing by the door beneath the camera, watching me run away. The person casting it being just out of frame, before turning the opposite direction and disappearing. Just seeing my terrified self running away and that shadow watching me do so. I have never felt so vulnerable. I'm not really a believer in the paranormal, but I just don't know what kind of sick person would wait in a restaurant for 2 hours after close, not steal anything, just to scare the employee that was locking up. I know for a fact it wasn't any of my coworkers. Obviously, there wasn't much that could be done to find out who it was. Nothing shows anyone entering the building after close, and from what we could tell, everyone who entered that day had left. This event still has me questioning myself on whether it was a sick prank, someone mentally ill, or something supernatural. In my late teens, early 20s, I was a venture scout and leader for trips my local Boy Scout troop went on. I'm a female, but my brother was part of the troop for years, and I became friends with everyone in the troop. I completed my youth protection training and was allowed to become a leader/chaperone on camping trips and other wilderness-related outings. I had a longtime friend in the troop. Let's call him Sam, and he was a close friend of my whole family. Sam was a little older than me and had already been a Boy Scout leader for several years at this point. This story takes place in November of 2018. Sam and I were made the leaders of an upcoming camping trip, the annual fall canoe float down the Buffalo National River in Arkansas. The Buffalo River runs about 135 miles through the Ozark Mountains, with enormous bluffs on at least one side or the other through most of it. It flows through some of the most beautiful parts of Northwest and Northern Arkansas, and despite my incident, I still encourage you to take a trip there. We had made camp that afternoon on a riverbank after about 15 miles from where we put it in. The scouts put up their tent about 25 yards upstream of my tent, with the campfire and cooking station situated in between us. As I was setting up, I mentioned to Sam that I was a little nervous about sleeping in my tent alone for the first time. He shrugged me off and told me it would be fine, that sleeping alone was actually quite peaceful. I remember rolling my eyes because, unlike me, Sam had not only been camping completely alone for years, he had also done it in a hammock with no other what I consider protective gear. I didn't bother to ask him to tent with me because, according to the scouting rules, males and females cannot share tents, and I didn't want to get in trouble the very first time I was leading the troop. However, I think Sam sensed my unease, and he set up his sleeping arrangements outside my tent, which consisted of a sleeping pad on the ground with his canoe flipped over on top of him, like a coffin. To this day, I admire what it must have been like to live with so little concern. We all spent the evening around the campfire, talking and making dinner. The forest and the river all around us was so full of life that I felt a little more comfortable when we all decided to turn in for the night. I watched Sam lay down on his pad and flip the canoe over on top of him, before sighing with contentment, and I climbed into my tent. I spent the first hour or two reading while listening to the sounds of the boys up the riverbank fade as they all started to fall asleep. But I couldn't. The nighttime temperature had dropped below freezing. Then, of course, I needed to pee. I spent probably another 10 minutes trying to trick myself into forgetting about it and fall asleep, but it was impossible. Finally, I got out of my tent, tapped Sam's canoe to let him know where I was going, and then headed up the bank for some privacy. I don't know how many women on here have peed in the woods, but if you have, you'll know it's one of the worst things about camping. What made it even worse is because I was cautious about being seen. I climbed all the way up the embankment and walked about 10 feet into the woods before stopping. And oh my gosh, it was miserable. Not only having to drop drawer in the freezing cold, but also being completely vulnerable. But the worst part about it was the woods were completely silent. Not a cricket, not a rustle of a squirrel. Nothing. It didn't click in my head until years later about how bad that actually is. Just the primitive part of my brain started screaming to leave immediately. I ran back to the embankment before sliding down onto my butt and sprinting back to camp. Once back around everyone else, and in the glow of the full moon, I had a little more sense of security. The river was burbling on quietly, and I could see the dying embers of the campfire before getting the idea to take the warm rocks from the campfire and put them in my sleeping bag to try to get enough warmth to sleep. I drug about 4 or 5 decent-sized stones into my tent and slipped them into the bottom of my sleeping bag. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. I was awake for hours in pain from how cold I was, trying to rub the ache out of my legs. I remember actually tearing up a bit with how exhausted and cold I was. That's when I heard a noise, like footsteps walking around downstream from my tent. The bank was covered in smooth river stones, so any kind of footsteps would make noise. But the sound of the rocks shifting told me that this was something large. Then I heard them enter the water, and I worried one of the boys was awake and going for a midnight swim. I quickly unzipped my tent and poked my head out to see an elk drinking from the river. At least it looked like an elk. It was massive, but it was far enough away and standing perfectly in shadow that I wasn't quite sure. It was much too big to be a deer, but we don't have moose in Arkansas. I quietly watched it, hoping to see more of it, when it looked directly at me. Its face, even in the shadow, triggered my primitive brain again. If my blood wasn't running cold before, it was now. I felt this prickling up my neck as this unknown terror crept into my bones. I ducked my head back into my tent and stayed completely still for hours. The combination of fear and the cold wasted any hope of sleeping. I never heard the elk thing leave the bank, but I also didn't even think about listening for it. The woods were that almost screaming silence again. After what felt like hours, someone tapped on my tent and said, "Come on out, it's time to go." I pressed my face into my hands and breathed this sigh of both relief and exhaustion. I had made it through the night, and even though I didn't get any sleep, it was over. I quickly stuck my feet in my boots and stepped out of my tent to find nothing. It was still night. I had confused the light from the moon as dawn. No one was around my tent, and the time it took from when they spoke to me to when I came out was not enough time for one of the boys to make it back to their tent before I saw them. That pricking feeling came back, but this time it was all over my body as I heard a voice in my head say, "Don't turn around." I slowly sat backwards in my tent and zipped myself up into it with shaking hands. I laid down in my sleeping bag and covered my face and prayed. I prayed for so long until I finally fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to the familiar voice of Sam talking to another scout outside my tent. I could feel the warmth of the sun beating down into my tent. I know I looked terrible by the way Sam did a double take upon seeing me. "Oh, geez, you look like you didn't sleep at all." "Did you come to my tent last night?" I asked him. Sam, still studying my face, slowly responded, "No." "Please don't play with me. If you did, you got me good. Great. Just don't continue the joke right now if you did, please." I felt a little bad being accusatory, because Sam was actually a pretty no-nonsense guy, especially when it came to being in charge on camping trips. "Diana, no. I wouldn't try to scare you. I know how nervous you were about sleeping alone out here." He folded up his pad before tossing it into his canoe and throwing it over his shoulder. "But I guess you were too scared last night." I looked confused. "What?" Sam gestured up the embankment into the woods. "I heard you make a few trips up there. Next time just get a Gatorade bottle and you won't have to leave your tent." Around that time, the rest of the scouts had announced that they had finished cooking breakfast, and everyone migrated to the campfire. But I felt like I had just sunk down to my knees in the river mud. I had left the tent once. I went up the embankment and came back down once. So if it wasn't me, what had Sam heard coming out of the woods and checking out my tent multiple times that night? Why hadn't I heard it? I have told this story to people before, and they say I had just dreamed it, but I know that I hadn't. I had been too cold and had sat up in my sleeping bag most of the night, rubbing my legs. And since I know it wasn't a dream, what is hiding and hunting in the woods along the Buffalo River? In my late teens, early 20s, I was a venture scout and leader for trips my local Boy Scout troop went on. I'm a female, but my brother was part of the troop for years, and I became friends with everyone in the troop. I completed my youth protection training and was allowed to become a leader/chaperone on camping trips and other wilderness-related outings. I had a longtime friend in the troop. Let's call him Sam, and he was a close friend of my whole family. Sam was a little older than me and had already been a Boy Scout leader for several years at this point. This story takes place in November of 2018. Sam and I were made the leaders of an upcoming camping trip, the annual fall canoe float down the Buffalo National River in Arkansas. The Buffalo River runs about 135 miles through the Ozark Mountains, with enormous bluffs on at least one side or the other through most of it. It flows through some of the most beautiful parts of northwest and northern Arkansas, and despite my incident, I still encourage you to take a trip there. We had made camp that afternoon on a riverbank after about 15 miles from where we put it in. The scouts put up their tents about 25 yards upstream of my tent, with the campfire and cooking station situated in between us. As I was setting up, I mentioned to Sam that I was a little nervous about sleeping in my tent alone for the first time. He shrugged me off and told me it would be fine, that sleeping alone was actually quite peaceful. I remember rolling my eyes because, unlike me, Sam had not only been camping completely alone for years, he had also done it in a hammock with no other what I consider protective gear. I didn't bother to ask him to tent with me because, according to the scouting rules, males and females cannot share tents, and I didn't want to get in trouble the very first time I was leading the troop. However, I think Sam sensed my unease, and he set up his sleeping arrangements outside my tent, which consisted of a sleeping pad on the ground with his canoe flipped over on top of him, like a coffin. To this day, I admire what it must have been like to live with so little concern. We all spent the evening around the campfire, talking and making dinner. The forest and the river all around us was so full of life that I felt a little more comfortable when we all decided to turn in for the night. I watched Sam lay down on his pad and flip the canoe over on top of him, before sighing with contentment, and I climbed into my tent. I spent the first hour or two reading while listening to the sounds of the boys up the riverbank fade as they all started to fall asleep. But I couldn't. The nighttime temperature had dropped below freezing. Then, of course, I needed to pee. I spent probably another 10 minutes trying to trick myself into forgetting about it and fall asleep, but it was impossible. Finally, I got out of my tent, tapped Sam's canoe to let him know where I was going, and then headed up the bank for some privacy. I don't know how many women on here have peed in the woods, but if you have, you'll know it's one of the worst things about camping. What made it even worse is because I was cautious about being seen. I climbed all the way up the embankment and walked about 10 feet into the woods before stopping. And oh my gosh, it was miserable. Not only having to drop drawer in the freezing cold, but also being completely vulnerable. But the worst part about it was the woods were completely silent. Not a cricket, not a rustle of a squirrel. Nothing. It didn't click in my head until years later about how bad that actually is. Just the primitive part of my brain started screaming to leave immediately. I ran back to the embankment before sliding down onto my butt and sprinting back to camp. Once back around everyone else, and in the glow of the full moon, I had a little more sense of security. The river was burbling on quietly, and I could see the dying embers of the campfire before getting the idea to take the warm rocks from the campfire and put them in my sleeping bag to try to get enough warmth to sleep. I drug about 4 or 5 decent-sized stones into my tent and slipped them into the bottom of my sleeping bag. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough. I was awake for hours in pain from how cold I was, trying to rub the ache out of my legs. I remember actually tearing up a bit with how exhausted and cold I was. That's when I heard a noise, like footsteps walking around downstream from my tent. The bank was covered in smooth river stones, so any kind of footsteps would make noise. But the sound of the rocks shifting told me that this was something large. Then I heard them enter the water, and I worried one of the boys was awake and going for a midnight swim. I quickly unzipped my tent and poked my head out to see an elk drinking from the river. At least it looked like an elk. It was massive, but it was far enough away and standing perfectly in shadow that I wasn't quite sure. It was much too big to be a deer, but we don't have moose in Arkansas. I quietly watched it, hoping to see more of it, when it looked directly at me. Its face, even in the shadow, triggered my primitive brain again. If my blood wasn't running cold before, it was now. I felt this prickling up my neck as this unknown terror crept into my bones. I ducked my head back into my tent and stayed completely still. For hours. The combination of fear and the cold wasted any hope of sleeping. I never heard the elk thing leave the bank, but I also didn't even think about listening for it. The woods were that almost screaming silence again. After what felt like hours, someone tapped on my tent and said, "Come on out, it's time to go." I pressed my face into my hands and breathed this sigh of both relief and exhaustion. I had made it through the night, and even though I didn't get any sleep, it was over. I quickly stuck my feet in my boots and stepped out of my tent to find nothing. It was still night. I had confused the light from the moon as dawn. No one was around my tent, and the time it took from when they spoke to me to when I came out was not enough time for one of the boys to make it back to their tent before I saw them. That pricking feeling came back, but this time it was all over my body as I heard a voice in my head say, "Don't turn around." I slowly sat backwards in my tent and zipped myself up into it with shaking hands. I laid down in my sleeping bag and covered my face and prayed. I prayed for so long until I finally fell asleep. In the morning, I woke up to the familiar voice of Sam talking to another scout outside my tent. I could feel the warmth of the sun beating down into my tent. I know I looked terrible by the way Sam did a double take upon seeing me. "Oh, geez, you look like you didn't sleep at all." "Did you come to my tent last night?" I asked him. Sam, still studying my face, slowly responded, "No." "Please don't play with me. If you did, you got me good. Great. Just don't continue the joke right now if you did, please." I felt a little bad being accusatory, because Sam was actually a pretty no-nonsense guy, especially when it came to being in charge on camping trips. "Diana, no. I wouldn't try to scare you. I know how nervous you were about sleeping alone out here." He folded up his pad before tossing it into his canoe and throwing it over his shoulder. "But I guess you were too scared last night." I looked confused. "What?" Sam gestured up the embankment into the woods. "I heard you make a few trips up there. Next time just get a Gatorade bottle and you won't have to leave your tent." Around that time, the rest of the scouts had announced that they had finished cooking breakfast, and everyone migrated to the campfire. But I felt like I had just sunk down to my knees in the river mud. I had left the tent once. I went up the embankment and came back down once. So if it wasn't me, what had Sam heard coming out of the woods and checking out my tent multiple times that night? Why hadn't I heard it? I have told this story to people before, and they say I had just dreamed it, but I know that I hadn't. I had been too cold and had sat up in my sleeping bag most of the night, rubbing my legs. And since I know it wasn't a dream, what is hiding and hunting in the woods along the Buffalo River?